Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. What is this, Samantha? Tell me, what is this? Asked her husband Walter, staring at her through narrowing eyes, and waving around the letter written in exquisite curly black calligraphy-style writing, obviously done with a fountain pen. Samantha would have recognized that exquisite writing anywhere, for people in this day and age did not write so elegantly. It was a skill that seemed long since to be forgotten about, as people these days snuggled up to the world of technology, abandoning any other older art forms. Ostensibly that writing would have looked perfect on an old-fashioned manuscript, and Samantha knew only one person that wrote like this, someone who painstakingly spent his entire life fixing up old-fashioned manuscripts fastidiously by hand to make them look perfect, someone who travelled the entire globe dealing with ancient antiquities, who studied Egyptian hieroglyphics and strange discoveries that had been buried beneath the desert sand for thousands of years. Someone who'd prided himself of never committing to anything beyond the history of our planet, going back for centuries, for this man loved history, as if the memories of the past should always be embraced, so that we can better understand our futures. Samantha stood in the doorway of her private study, her eyes staring in horror at the letter her husband was holding in his hands. The room was cloaked in darkness, as without the power being on in the house, everything looked ambiguously obscure and indistinct, and if you were not acquainted with the layout of the house, you might have gone bumping into sofas and dressers, for everything was indistinguishable in the dark shadows. In the subtle light of Walter's torch, she could distinguish his profile pretty well, the familiar cookie-cutter silhouette of his tall, lanky form, that she was as familiar with as the squiggle of her own signature. Samantha, known to her friends as Sammy or Sam if you like, could observe her husband seated on the green leather swivel chair at her walnut desk in her study. He looked like one of those tall men you see on aeroplanes that are all legs and take up all the legroom in front of their seat because of their great length. It is rather like stuffing a long frankfurter sausage in a very small hot dog roll, so that the ends of the frankfurter hang over the sides, as such was the excess of her husband's legs. She could not read the expression on his face, for the darkness in the room confiscated any direct light, but she could feel the tension spiralling around the room like a spinning vortex of rather uncongenial energy. It was almost as if the temperature had suddenly dropped quite dramatically. For a while the silence between the couple was very pronounced, as Samantha struggled inwardly to find the words she needed to articulate, to appease this awkwardly tense, cliff-hanging situation. Her mind was screaming like a seagull, as no words tumbled out of her mouth, for her tongue did not seem to wish to move on its own accord. Samantha knew her husband Walter would know at once if she were lying to him, because when that happened, she would twitch nervously. The corners of her mouth were a giveaway. They would lift up into a gormlessly inappropriate smile. She got no pleasure out of lying, of course, but she would always find herself smiling in inexpedient situations, She had smiled infeliciously at her late mother's funeral. People had given her funny, bewildered looks, because she looked so pleased during the entire ceremony, when she'd been anything but. It was unfortunate that Samantha used ignoble smiling as a coping mechanism, and no one could actually comprehend the inward turmoil she'd been going through after her mother's death, as her animated, impassioned face failed to express the heightened gravity of her grief and her lugubrious despair. The pained reality was that Walter could read her like a book, so it would be futilely inefficacious to pull the wool over his eyes. But how would he react if he were to know the real truth? It would absolutely destroy him. Of that she was most sure. Samantha felt in this poignantly disturbing moment like she had as a little girl when she'd been caught red-handed, with her hand in her mother's purse, pinching some spare change out of her mother's leather wallet, so she could go up to the corner shop up the top of the road to buy herself some candies. She had done this often enough as a child. Her mother had failed to notice a thing, until one day she did, and all hell had broken loose in her childhood home, when her mother threw a tantrum. Ever since then, Sammy had never stolen a thing in her entire life, for she carried the shame within her like a scar that refused to fade. She still remembered her mother's face, paling in shock horror. "What the hell are you doing, Sammy?" her mother had cried out in horror, as she observed her daughter rifling through her purse like a raccoon scavenging the scraps from the dumpster. At the time, Samantha's shame had been so fearsome, she had not been able to look her mother straight in the face. She had smiled as she always did, in highly charged nervous situations, and her dim-witted vacuous grin had made matters significantly worse, as her mother had misconstrued that nervous grin on her daughter's face as her daughter being arrogantly cocky. "You think this is funny, do you, Sammy? Stealing my money out of my purse like this?" Her mother had snorted in disgust, snatching the purse away from Sammy's hands. "I can't believe you're my own daughter and you're stealing from me like this. Go on, admit it, Sammy. That's exactly what you were doing. It's lucky I caught you. You've got some explaining to do, my girl. Wait until your father learns about this. He won't be remotely happy with you when he learns that we're raising a thief for a daughter. We didn't bring you up to become a lawless thug, stealing from your own mother. How low can you get? It's absolutely disgusting. Now get out of my sight, girl, and consider yourself grounded for the rest of the month." "I'm so sorry, Mummy," she had said, choking back the tears. "I won't ever do it again, I promise you. I just wanted to buy some candy up the road, but I was going to pay you back. I promise you I was." "You were never going to pay me back, Sammy, or you would not have done this in the first place. Wouldn't you? You're a thief, that's what you are." If Sammy had felt bad back then, this shameful, ignominious moment with her husband was 1,000 times worse. For Sammy knew all too well the contents of that letter had the power to dismantle her entire life and tear her family apart limb from limb. For she had been nursing a secret that her husband knew nothing about, and now he could potentially uncover the truth, and how he would react to it, God only knows. One thing for sure is that he might never look at Sammy in quite the same tender way ever again. Everyone knew when the trust is gone from a relationship, there was no point in putting it back together again. Like when a plate breaks apart and you stick it together with superglue, but the cracks are always there. The plate has become porously fragile, and with a greater risk of breaking than ever before. It does not weather the storms of life so easily, as a vigorous hot wash in the dishwasher or some rough handling can make the plate break all over again. It would seem relationships are no different to a broken plate in many respects, for they are both hard to bring back together once they have fallen apart. Samantha Harris's face stared in horror at the letter that Walter was holding up to show her. Her face burnt as red and as bright as a field of poppies, as the blood rushed to her skin, while a searing contrition seeped into every single cell in her entire body. It would seem her heart almost skipped a beat, as it thundered through her chest as violently as if hundreds of galloping stallions had jumped right through her all at once. This was her worst moment being fully realized, like when a festering wound you had stitched closed in the emergency room suddenly rips open and all the pus and gunk comes seeping out of the wound, drawing your swift attention to the rancid infection that lies beneath, that you hope to keep neatly buried behind those stitches, because seeing what's really going on below the surface ain't such a good idea, nor is it a terribly pretty sight. Samantha had never meant for Walter to find the letter. She was an absolute fool to have even hidden it away, as even an infestation of termites can come crawling out of the woodwork to reveal themselves sooner or later. Why had she not burnt the letter a long time ago? She had been sorely tempted to do so, but had been unable to burn up the letter that Timothy had sent her. She still held a little flame in her heart for him. He had once been the quintessential love of her life. Some candles did not burn out so easily, no matter how much you tried to blow them out. Timothy was a blast from the past that she would never be able to forget, someone who'd wormed his way into her heart and had never quite managed to worm his way out. Walter must have stumbled across the letter purely by accident when looking for the electric bill he needed to pay. Normally Samantha prided herself in paying the household bills with a swift regularity. To date she had paid every single bill on schedule, so she believed, of course, until it came to light that she had forgotten to pay the electrics. She considered the paying of monthly bills to be one of her jobs, among a plethora of highly demanding household chores that included doing laundry, cleaning, cooking, and grocery shopping, the latter that she did reasonably well. Walter worked rather hard every day, leaving for work at 7 in the morning and returning at 5 o'clock in the afternoon like clockwork. His regimental routines were as reliable as the rising and the setting of the sun every day. Samantha knew he abhorred his job at the All-American Bank where he worked, in some kind of managerial position that sounded so dreadfully boring that even Samantha didn't quiz him much about his job, as when he returned home every evening, Walter certainly didn't want to talk about it, and who could blame him for that? She would ask him how his day at work had been, and he would always say, "Fine." And then Samantha found inquiring about anything else was rather like extracting blood out of a stone. She was, of course, poignantly very well aware that Walter Harris diligently worked to give them all better lives. She was conscious of his selfless sacrifices that he made for the family. She knew that Walter busted a gut to pay their bills and to put food on the table, and he never once remotely complained about the laborious drudgery of his job, which he once described as so tediously dull, so monotonously repetitive, that watching paint dry was infinitely more preferable, and that was a damning indictment about his job indeed. Walter adored his family. He'd have given his shirt off his own back to provide for their every single need. The least Sammy could do was play her part, by pulling her weight around the house and running an efficient household, which is what she invariably did to the best of her ability. But her biggest stumbling block for her was the laborious challenge of paying the bills. If the truth be told, Sammy thoroughly enjoyed being a full-time stay-at-home mother, taking care of her 2 children, and being there for them at school fetes and sports games alike. The only trouble is the gulf between her daughter and her son's age was exceedingly wide, but for some reason she hadn't anticipated falling pregnant 9 years ago. But when it had happened, she had been delighted to become a mother again. It would seem her husband Walter had been tickled pink to become a father. Furthermore, it would seem her son Austin had enjoyed being a big brother to his little sister Albright, even if he was 9 years her senior. Samantha was usually reliable in getting things done around the house with relative ease, but due to one abysmal oversight on her part, she had foolishly overlooked paying the electric bill, and as a sad consequence, she would later learn the electric company's patience had worn thin, and their house had been cut off from the main power grid, which was a fortuitous surprise that she had never seen coming. Walter had returned home that evening to a house steeped in darkness, like that of black coffee, and that would continue indefinitely until they resumed payment of their electric bill. Walter didn't allow life's little tumultuous blows to ever get him down. As far as he was concerned, when you had a problem, you just fixed it, and this was no different. Once the electric bill was paid, the problem would go away. And so with his usually gallant grace, he did not denigrate his wife Sammy for her oversight, and merely commented about how charming and delightful it was to eat their dinner that night by candlelight. Little did he know that this would be the last time he ever got to enjoy an evening meal with his family. Walter always chose to see the positive side in any bad situation. Samantha could only thank her lucky stars that her range oven was fired by gas, or the family that evening would have been reduced to eating cold ham and cheese sandwiches for dinner, instead of something warm and comforting, which was always needed on a cold winter's night. "We should do this more often, I think," Walter joked, tucking hungrily into his melt-in-the-mouth chicken casserole his wife Sammy had lovingly cooked. "This is delicious, darling," he said appreciatively. "It's quite romantic eating our meal in this light, don't you think, kids?" he said, eyeing his 17-year-old son, Austin, through inquiring eyes. Whether Walter expected to get a positive response out of his belligerent teenage son, who had stormy moods that could rival the weather, he couldn't be sure, because beyond anything else, Austin was reliably unpredictable, so how he was going to behave tonight was very much debatable. Austin didn't answer, but was playing with his chicken awkwardly with a fork, tearing the moist meat away from the bone, with a methodical boredom. He didn't look remotely amused. He was wearing a sorrowful hangdog expression on his face. But Walter was naturally used to his son's wavering capriciousness by now. Let's just say from the time that Austin had turned 13, Walter had become uncomfortably aware that as far as Austin was concerned, he and his wife Sammy could do nothing right. But then again, that was teenagers for you, always pushing the boundaries and testing the waters to see how far they could press your buttons, rather like a little child prodding a frog until the frog reacts by jumping away and causing the child to chuckle in delight. Walter had been a teenager once, but he didn't believe for a single second he'd ever been as disagreeable as his son Austin was. Even his mother had said from day one Walter had been a pleasure to raise, and had never ever given her grief. There were times he wished he could shake out his son's capricious energy, like you might shake off the dust covers from the chairs on the patio. In truth, it was a long time since he'd seen his son smile. Austin appeared to wear the weight of the world on his young shoulders. Sometimes Walter wished he could tell his son to lighten up, to not take life so damn seriously. Walter suspected the music his son listened to was part of the problem. He was sure the loud, crashing, beating sounds of the heavy metal wasn't helping his son's moods very much, and was partly responsible for his son's dark episodes. He surmised that he too would be rather grumpy if he listened to that hideous music day after day like that. At best he'd probably tear his own hair out, well, what was left of its rapidly thinning hairline. That music was enough to make anyone morbidly depressed. Walter would return home every single afternoon to hear the loud drum rolls of the music coming from his son's bedroom. He would knock politely on his son's bedroom door, and Austin would shout out, "Yes, what do you want?" "It's me, son," Walter would say. "I just want to let you know I'm back home from the office." "Go away, Dad," would come the predictably curt response. "Leave me alone. I'm listening to my music." The only time Austin would grace the family with his presence was when he was hungry, and at 6'3" he had an appetite on him that would rival an entire football team. That boy got through gallons of ice cream, packets of cereal, and pints of milk every single week, and was as slender as a string bean. But all the ingestion of dairy products meant his son had regular pimple outbreaks on his skin. Walter had been much the same when he had been his son's age, and the skin problem stopped abruptly on the day he turned 20, almost as if his body had decided his teenage years were finally over. It was Walter Harris's 8-year-old daughter Albright who was the apple of his beloved eye. He loved the bones of his little girl, and she could do no wrong in his sight. But that was because he was rather biased. She was a late lamb in their family, a child that had arrived in their lives like a bright sunny surprise, or a mystery package if you like, wrapped in pink ribbon. From the moment he laid eyes on the cute little bundle of joy, he had become the proudest, most besotted father in the entire world. It was Albright's cheerful ebullience that broke the awkward silence around the dinner table that evening, and with her zealous injection of positivity and childlike enthusiasm, it always made Walter smile. "This is so cool, Daddy. It's like a birthday party, isn't it? Albright's ebullient blue eyes shone brightly. Can we eat like this with candles every single night, Daddy? The table looks so pretty, she said happily, diving into her chicken with gusto, as if the candles themselves had made the food all the more appetizing. The chicken is yummy, yummy, Mummy. Really yummy. One thing about little Albright is she was always so appreciative about everything, unlike his son Austin, who seemed to enjoy having a good old grumble when the opportunity presented itself. Walter was sure if his son stopped listening to that deadbeat dumb music of his, that he might actually have a turnaround in his personality. I'm so glad you like it, sweetheart, said Sammy, wiping some crumbs away from her mouth and looking up at her son questioningly. How about you, Austin? Was the casserole to your liking? I notice you didn't seem to be eating terribly much, which is so unlike you, love. You normally have quite a healthy appetite on you. I put a little truffle oil in the dish to bring out the flavour of the chicken. I think it tastes delicious, don't you? I don't care about truffle oil, or what stupid ingredients you put in your pathetic casseroles. You think this is cool, eating by candlelight? Said Austin indignantly, a sizable frown developing on his handsome face that rather reminded Samantha of an ugly gargoyle. Her son did know how to pull some disagreeable expressions that would be scary enough for a Halloween party, because at the dinner table that evening he bore an uncanny resemblance to the Grim Reaper. She almost told him this, but then she thought better about it, because Austin would only take it as a compliment. This really sucks, Austin chided. Thanks to you, Mum, I can't listen to any of my music. I can't believe you forgot to pay the electric bill. Are you for real? I don't know anyone who forgets to pay their electrics. How stupid can you get? Of all the people in America, I guess we're the only household that forgets to pay our electric bill. Enough, Austin, snapped Walter. Don't you dare speak to your mother like that. Your mother is definitely not stupid. You need to apologize to her at once. I've had enough of your constant complaining, son. You fail to see the good in anything these days. You're always looking for an opportunity to moan about something. You're lucky to have a roof over your head and food in your belly. Some kids around the world go to bed every single night with nothing in their stomachs. And you're complaining because of one night of your life the lights went out? It's not a big deal, son. Get over yourself, will you? Oh, so you're going to lay a guilt trip on me, are you, Dad? Is that right? You're going to tell me about the starving kids in Africa, are you? It's amazing how you always happen to bring them up at a moment's notice to remind me to be grateful for all that you do. Mum forgot to pay for the electrics, and my guess is she hasn't paid them for quite a while, or they wouldn't have cut us off like this. I'm entitled to be pissed about this, and it's got nothing to do with the starving kids in the third world going to bed with empty stomachs. But somehow you're so quick to remind me of them at any given opportunity. It's pathetic, Dad. You're pathetic. Apologize to your mother at once. What is wrong with you, Austin? Why do you always have to talk back to us like this, as if you have to have the very last word? It's not necessarily, Walter, Samantha interjected, waving her hand in front of her face, as if to fan away the discord that had unfortunately gathered around the dinner table, like a fifth very unwelcome guest. She hated it when the family meals turned ugly like this, and she would have done anything in her power to redeem the situation. She had always fancied family life would be like the Waltons, but it was anything but. There was always one hurdle or another to overcome, and Austin had not been the easiest son to raise. And it certainly didn't help matters that this best friend of his, Ivan, was dabbling with less than savoury things and encouraging her son to get embroiled in the occult. But thank God Austin had wisely shown no interest in that avenue of inquiry. She had warned her son to stay away from Ivan and his tenebrific influences, but she might as well have been talking to a brick wall, because Ivan and her son Austin enjoyed a very solid friendship and had done so since they were toddlers. I don't like you being friends with Ivan any more, love. I know you go back a long time with him, and you've been friends for many years. But these days, with his dabbling in the occult like he does. I honestly don't think he's a good influence on you. I think you should stay well away from him. I don't care what you think of Ivan. He's my best friend, Mum. Always has been. Your opinion counts for nothing. But, darling, he dabbles with the occult. That's a dangerous thing to do. I hope you realise that. Austin provocatively let out a big cackle of witch-like laughter in order to wind up his mother. He rolled his eyes in the back of his head in exasperation, as if he thought his mother was a complete idiot. Mum, it's only a bit of fun. Ivan is just having fun, that's all. It's no big deal. It's hardly as if any ghosts and ghoulies are going to come after him. He laughed. You shouldn't joke about such things, love. What Sammy failed to realise is that if you tell your teenage son to lay off doing something, then invariably you're going to drive him to doing it. It seemed that her son and Ivan had grown increasingly inseparable. They seemed to just hang around together, as if they were joined at the hip, and this was a friendship she didn't like. After Sammy had finished eating, she put her knife and fork down together very neatly and said, Austin's absolutely right. I should have paid the electric bill. I honestly don't know how I overlooked it, and I probably haven't paid it for a couple of months or so. But I assure you it was an oversight on my part, and I'm very sorry to let you all down like this. It's miserable not being able to see properly. And forget the electric blankets this evening. They'll be off. You'll need to huddle up under the warm blankets tonight to keep you warm, and I might make us some hot water bottles. Goodness gracious, love, you're being far too hard on yourself, said Walter grimly. We've all forgotten things at some point in time, have we not? It's not a train wreck, is it? It's a problem easily resolved. Tomorrow everything will be as right as rain when I get onto the phone to the electric company and get this sorted out. But in the meantime, son, try and look a little positive, will you? Your mother has made a delicious meal for us this evening, and you look decidedly miserable, like a penguin who's woken up to discover all the ice in Antarctica has melted. Whatever, said Austin, sniggering. At least when it's dark in Antarctica, it isn't because your mother's forgotten to pay the electric bill, he said scathingly. He looked down at his plate of chicken casserole with contempt, as if his mother had dished him up a pile of cow intestines for him to get stuck into. I will remind you, Dad, we wouldn't be in this position if Mum had actually paid the bills around here. I can't believe you trust Mum to do all that stuff. She's useless with paperwork, absolutely useless. I could have told you that ages ago. Have you not realised that yet? Mum can be so dopey half the time, with her head in the clouds. I'm surprised any bills get paid at all, if you want the honest truth. Now, son, that was completely uncalled for. Your mother works damn hard around here, I'd like to remind you. She doesn't work damn hard. She only works hard at the things she likes doing. That's the difference, said Austin half-heartedly. Things like playing the piano, sewing on her sewing machine, or cooking. How am I supposed to get any homework done this evening without any light or any background music? He said, looking very downcast. I don't like working without my music. I can't think straight without it. Are you kidding me, son? I'm surprised the music doesn't blast your brains out. How can you listen to that stuff? God only knows. It's enough to give you a thunderous migraine headache, or even brain damage. My music is cool, Dad, but I wouldn't expect you to understand that, because you're from a generation of dinosaurs, aren't you? I'm not hungry, he said, suddenly pushing his plate of steaming chicken away. It was unlike Austin to refuse food, but sometimes his pride could be a big stumbling block for him, and he really wanted his mother to feel bad about her failure to pay the electric bill, because Austin seemed to live and breathe that horrible music he listened to, as if it was an invaluable source of life-giving energy. I'm going to my bedroom, he said miserably, rising up to his feet, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, because he was so tall. He abruptly pushed the chair away from him, so that it shrieked across the linoleum floor, sounding ominously like nails being scratched across a chalkboard. He stampeded angrily through the kitchen, like an elephant wanting everyone to be poignantly aware of just how pissed he was. so that as he left the room, it felt like he'd left behind a dark, lingering cloud, which did nothing to lift the mood around the dinner table that evening. Austen was normally light on his feet, but this evening he made absolutely certain that he thundered towards his bedroom to express the level of indignance he felt towards his parents. Everyone could hear the door of his bedroom slamming loudly behind him, so that the foundations of the house began to shake. In Austen's opinion, his parents could do nothing right. His ditzy mother was such a klutz at times, but his father seemed oblivious to this fact, and allowed her to be responsible to pay for the bills. Was it any wonder they were in this tangled mess? He could count on his hands the number of times his mother had handed him a lunch bag and forgotten to put the sandwiches inside it, and as a consequence had humiliated him by arriving at school with his sandwiches, not embarrassed to interrupt one of his classes to hand them over to him in front of all the students. Sammy was certain her son had no intention of doing any homework tonight. He would lightly tell his teacher that the lights had gone out in the house, thanks to his insouciant, pretty useless mother, so he'd been unable to do it. It was probably a better excuse for him to use than "my dog ate my homework," an excuse that Austen had artfully employed a couple of times to his teachers over the years, claiming that they had a frisky border collie at home that chewed everything up in sight. The truth was the family had never owned a border collie, but Austen could make the teachers believe that he'd gone to the moon for spring break and back if he wanted to, and they would have believed him. The teachers at Austen's school all thought Austen was sweetness and light. They had no idea how obnoxious her son could be behind the scenes. And when Sammy would visit the teachers for parents' evening, they would applaud her son, singing her son's praises, as if Austen was some kind of superhero. And Sammy was unable to believe they were actually talking about her son Austen, who at home was anything but sweet. It was like her son showed two faces to the world. Samantha shrugged as she saw her son's overly exaggerated dramatic exit from the kitchen. Oh dear, she said, patting her face yet again with a white table napkin. Look what I've gone and done. Austen is very upset and aggrieved with me. He can't bear to be without his music, can he? I worry about him, you know, Walter, listening to that thumping music all day long. I'm sure it can't be good for him. And these days he's always in such a foul mood. That son of ours is completely ungrateful, a spoilt brat he is, and that music is frying his brain. He needs to learn some manners, if you ask me, said Walter, looking completely disenchanted by his son's insubordinate behaviour. Austen's always cross these days, said Albright. I think he's upset 'cause his music isn't playing right now, and he doesn't like it when it's dark everywhere. But I don't understand why, because it's so nice eating with the candlelight. I know, dear, said Samantha, but that's teenagers for you. They don't appreciate candles like you and I do, Albright. I guess your brother's upset about the electricity. I suppose I can't blame him for that. It's not fun stumbling around the darkness, is it? But it's nice. We can play games and hide and seek in the dark. And it's nice to eat by candlelight, said Albright excitedly. Wait until I tell Kendall in the morning that we ate our dinner by candlelight. She's going to be so jealous. The rest of the dinner was eaten in silence, surrounded by the flickering, rather magical glow of the candles and the delicious savoury earthy scents of the chicken casserole. Despite everything, Samantha thought Albright was right. It was indeed pretty special, eating one's dinner by candlelight. But how Sammy wished it wasn't in these circumstances, as Sammy hated upsetting her teenage son. Sometimes she felt like she was walking on eggshells around him, as everything seemed to fire him up these days. Samantha had been privately cursing herself for her failure to pay her bills. How could she have been so stupid, she asked herself, to get them cut off like this? But in truth, her son Austen was right. She was rather useless with paperwork, and paying bills was something she loathed doing, and her failure to be more efficient had come back to bite her. But little did she know that her oversight was about to cost her husband his life. When dinner was over, Samantha had tucked up Albright in bed, like she did every single night. How she loved her little girl, with her cherub little face and wide innocent blue eyes, and ringleted curls of honey blonde hair that were so buoyant they'd bounce back in her fingers. She sat by her daughter's bed and read her a story, while Walter remained in the kitchen, where by the light of his torch and a few candles to accompany him, he cleaned up the dishes and washed them by hand in cold water, made warmer by some water that he'd boiled on the kettle on the gas hob. He then dried the dishes attentively and put them away in their respective cupboards. The dishwasher tonight was enjoying a brief respite, as without any electricity, it certainly was not working. Walter was a considerate husband like that, and was always eager to lend a helping hand around the place. Once the kitchen was immaculate, Walter decided to ferret around in his wife's desk in her study to find that damned electric bill that was responsible for their blackout. He'd get things rolling by getting it paid first thing in the morning, he thought. He secretly suspected his son Austin was absolutely right, and while his wife Sammy did run an efficient ship with her household duties, when it came to paying the bills, she was pretty useless. But after they'd got married, she had insisted on taking responsibility for them, and Walter had reluctantly agreed to this. But he knew that this was not the first time his wife Sammy had messed up when it came to paying the bills. "Walter, what on earth are you doing in here, going through my desk like that?" "That is my desk, and that is my paperwork, and I would appreciate it if you didn't meddle through my stuff like this." She had entered her office only to observe her husband Walter rifling through the walnut desk, from where all her bills were paid, and where all her meal plans for the week ahead strategically laid out. Samantha's wide eyes revealed the level of her extreme disquiet that she felt having Walter ferreting through all the jumbled chaos of her stuff. It was both humiliating and embarrassing. No one likes it when somebody busybodies into their private affairs like this, especially when they're so messy, and Samantha was no exception to this rule. Walter, who was by nature a very kind, generous man, looked up at his wife Sammy reassuringly, and gave her a sheepish grin. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to interfere, but I'm looking for that electric bill, aren't I? But this desk is a sight for sore eyes, love. I'm not being rude, but in all honesty, I'm absolutely flabbergasted that you managed to find anything in this chaotic upheaval," he said, lifting up a thick pile of papers to demonstrate his point, along with some unopened brown envelopes. Sammy flushed as pink as a peony. This was more than a little embarrassing for her. "It looks like you haven't opened half of these envelopes, love. Some of them are very definitely bills that need paying. Is there something you're not telling me? Are you behind paying some of these bills?" "Of course I'm not behind paying the bills, Walter. I don't know what you're implying. I just overlooked the electric bill, but I've been very much prompt with paying all the other bills on time. You know, it just gets rather boring reading through all that stuff. I mean, can you blame me? It's laboriously dull." "Look, love, I'm not judging you. If things are getting on top of you, I can always pay the bills instead for the family. It's not a big deal for me. I work at a bank. I know about these things. But we can't get behind paying our bills, can we? We certainly don't want to end up getting bad credit records just because we forgot to pay a bill. I would hate that to happen to our family." "Oh, goodness gracious me, Walter. I never thought about that, about bad credit records and stuff like that. I've been such a complete idiot, haven't I? I guess, if the truth be told, I've been putting off going through everything. I'm so sorry I've let you and the kids down. You saw how mad Austin was with me tonight. He couldn't even bear to look me straight in the eyes. I think he thinks I've got feathers for brains." "Don't go demeaning yourself, love. You're not alone. Most people abhor paying bills, and I don't relish the matter very much either. But it needs to be done. It's one of the drudgerous routines of life that needs to be addressed, whether we like it or not." The desk was in embarrassment, and Samantha inwardly winced, seeing her husband going through all the paperwork. It made her flush with shame. The desk was clogged with bank statements, Receipts, letters from friends, old recipes, magazines and newspaper articles that she'd cut up. Was it any wonder that among the tsunami of papers the occasional bill would slip away from her focus, and she might actually forget to pay it as a consequence, especially when she abhorred the job in the very first place? She knew only too well how often she put things on the back burner to do another day. She was the world's best procrastinator when it comes to things that she loathed to do. "Good God, love," said Walter in astonishment. "How have you managed to pay any of our bills with all this chaos? Look at this desk. It gets worse the more I look into it. It looks like a missile has imploded in here. And that's being kind. You do need to reorganize this entire desk. My guess is you'll find things that you've been looking for a very long time, old recipes and stuff like that. I don't mean to have a go at you, Sammy. I know what you do around this house for all of us is invaluable. But how can you work in such a mess? No wonder you overlooked paying the electric bill. Frankly, I'm rather surprised you managed to pay anything at all, with things in such a precarious state. And half these bills haven't even been opened by you. Well, I'd been meaning to clean the desk out, but I just couldn't do it. Well, it might be a good idea to do, love, because we don't want to get cut off again. Next time it'll be our Walter. Let's just say if you find paying the bills so incredibly overwhelming, I will be happy to do it for us. It really isn't any skin off my nose. I'm much more organized than you are. Working at the bank has made me very efficient and methodical." "It's not your job, Walter. Why don't you go and relax and let me find that electric bill? There is some order to my mess, believe it or not. I'm sure I know where it can be located." "I don't think there isn't any order in this mess, love. If you think there is, you're kidding yourself. You'll be lucky to find anything in here, let alone the electric bill." As Sammy approached the desk to take over from Walter, he gently pushed her away. He was a sweet, considerate man who never lost his temper, but he knew that this desk looked like a minefield, and these bills needed sorting out. So with his powerful torch, he pretty much could see what he was doing, and he started to get on with things. He knew that this mess was partly his fault. They should have paid their bills a long time ago by standing order. Then none of these hiccups would have arisen. "I'm helping you sort this mess out, love. There is no shame in admitting that sometimes we need help in things. I'm much more scrupulous than you are. I'll find that bill for us. I tell you what, why don't you make us a cup of tea on the gas hob, while I go through some of these bills for us? Go on, off with you," he said, waving his hand at Sammy. "I can do this on my own," he said, looking up at her, giving her a reassuring smile. Sammy did not move, but reluctantly stood rather awkwardly in the doorway. She watched her husband sifting through the papers. She was hit with an ominous feeling of discomfort, as seeing her husband rifling through some of her personal stuff made her feel very uneasy. She was certain the letter from Timothy was well hidden, in its secret compartment in the walnut desk that her husband didn't know about. But knowing how close her husband could be to finding it, left her stomach lurching in horror. "I wish you'd let me do this, Walter. I don't know how I could have forgotten to pay the bill." Samantha apologized profusely again, with her face an expression of complete bewilderment. She shook her head disapprovingly. "Why would they disconnect us like this, without any advance warning? It's autumn, for goodness sake. The weather is getting a lot colder. They can't do this to us, can they? It can't be legal to do this to people, can it, Walter? I mean, this is seriously unscrupulous of them, if you ask me. I should write a letter of complaint to the electric company. This is downright unfair. You don't just cut off people like this without any due warning, do you?" Walter chuckled. He looked up at his wife with a twinkle in his steely grey eyes. "I suppose it's a quick way for them to ensure that our outstanding bills are paid. People always need electricity, so being cut off means they will do their damnedest to pay their bills in time. Don't you worry, my sweet pea. It's very easy to overlook payment. It can happen to the best of us. I wish you wouldn't keep beating yourself up about this. Albright was absolutely right. It was great fun eating by candlelight tonight. It was romantic. And as for Austin, don't take any notice of him. He's a belligerent teenager that is tirelessly complaining about one thing or another. And in his eyes, his parents can never do anything right. They're always at fault. I preferred it when he put me on a pedestal when he was younger. But now he's grown up. It's like he's seeing all our imperfections and isn't afraid to point them out to us, is he?
You are telling me,
said Samantha, rolling her eyes at the back of her head in exasperation.
If you think our Austin is bad, there are some rather unruly teenagers in his year, I hasten to say. And Amanda Waitree, Ivan's mother, you know Ivan has always been Walter's very best friend. Well, she was informing me that Ivan has painted his bedroom pitch black. Can you believe that? And if that isn't bad enough, the young man has been creeping out of his bedroom at all hours of the night. Can you believe it? She says he keeps visiting the cemetery at the back of their home. She followed him one night, asked him what the hell he was doing. He told her he was speaking to the dead. I couldn't believe it when she told me that. She said he had a Ouija board with him. She reckons he's been watching all those ghostly documentaries on television and is fixated about the supernatural. He goes on about how he wants to see a real ghost. Her boy doesn't know what he's doing experimenting with the occult like that. These teenagers need to learn some valuable lessons. He's messing around with things he can't even understand. Thank God our Austin isn't into that kind of thing. But having said that, I worry about him, because he's hanging around with Ivan all the time like he did when he was a tiny boy. And that boy with his dark passions, well, they might rub off on Austin. Poor Amanda Waitree. She says that her boy's idiosyncratic behaviour is freaking her the hell out. She's now bolted the window in his bedroom shut, so he can't creep out during the night. She's also burnt the Ouija board, because playing with the occult is asking for trouble. She even took him to the local church to get her pastor to speak to him.
Teenagers, Hay said Walter. Who would have them? It's insane what they put us adults through. But don't you worry about Austin. Ivan may be his best friend, but I don't think he's ever expressed any interest in the occult, has he? The only thing our son is interested in is sports and that damn music that he listens to, that drives me absolutely nuts.
Well, I hope you're right, love. I am extremely worried about Austin. Even though he's 17, you mustn't forget he's an impressionable young man. Teenagers can influence each other. And you know he hangs around Ivan all the time. They do say that you become like the company you keep.
You know what, love? You worry your pretty head far too much about things that are unlikely to ever happen. So what if Austin is friends with Ivan? Teenagers experiment with things all the time, don't they? There's nothing we can do to stop them. We can't have eyes on them all the time. I'm sure that Ivan will grow out of this weird phase in his life that he's going through at the moment. He'll soon get bored with it, find some other interest to occupy himself with.
Well, I hope you're right, love, said Samantha. I'm afraid I don't feel as confident as you do about this.
You know what I was thinking, love. Changing the subject, of course. We should get a standing order with the electric company at once. Then this sort of thing would never happen, for the money will come out of our account every single month. It's what most people do nowadays. I guess we've been rather unwisely paying our bills the old-fashioned way, which is infinitely less reliable. We're behind the times. We need to catch up with the way things are done now, and then we wouldn't be embroiled in all this dreadful mess. I mean, I work at a bank, for God's sake. You'd think I'd have modernized myself a little. So I don't have any excuses. I should know better. This is partly my responsibility.
Well, it would be a good idea to get a standing order. It would make things a whole lot easier, admitted Sammy. It's an absolute nightmare having to pay those bills every month. It's driving me completely bonkers.
Well, there you go. It's a good thing this has happened. We'll get those standing orders organized in the morning. Now, how about that tea we've been talking about, love?
Because it ain't going to boil itself, is it? Said Walter. I don't know about you, but I'm already parched. My throat is dry. While you make the tea, I'll find that elusive outstanding electric bill. It must be somewhere among all these papers. Oh, of course, I'll go and put the kettle on. What a great idea. Thank God we have a gas cooker, or we really would be in a pickle tonight. I can barely see my hand in front of my face, Walter. It is so formidably dark in here. I can't believe that you can actually see what you're doing, with just a torchlight for company. I still say it's unethical for the electrics company to switch us off like they did. I'm raving mad with them. You're right, said Walter. It's wrong to disconnect people like this without advance warning. Oh dear, he said, lifting up an envelope and showing it to his wife, his gaze now fixed on her questioningly. What is it? Asked Samantha, peering curiously at the envelope, with its bright red writing slashed over the front of the envelope that read in big capital letters, Final Demands. It's a final demand, love, for the electricity payment. By the looks of things, you haven't paid the electrics for quite some time, which is why they have abruptly cut us off. It seems like they've been giving us plenty of advanced warning in some of these notifications I see here. You haven't paid the bill for ages, love. Is it any wonder they've cut us off like this? Samantha ran her hands through her hair, gasping in astonishment. How the hell did I not see that coming? How didn't I see those notifications? I must have shoved them in the back of the desk, clean forgotten about them. To be fair, this final demand was unfortunately stuck behind another envelope, said Walter. But honestly, love, are you surprised that you overlooked this, considering the mess that your desk is in? I don't want to sound like a broken record, but this desk is deplorable. It's impossible to see the wood for the trees in here. Please don't go on about my shortcomings, Walter. I'm embarrassed enough as it is. I'm so aware of them. Austin is right, I'm dopey. Don't you think I feel bad enough about messing up like this? Don't worry, love. I'll help you throw out some of this stuff, said Walter, sifting through some old bills and tossing them into the wire paper basket. Look, you don't need this, nor do you need this, he said, rolling up random pieces of paper into balls and tossing them into the basket. Ah, that's already better, is it not? Please don't throw anything important to me out, especially not any recipes. I need those. I'll be back in a tick. I'm going to get the tea on. When Samantha returned to her office with 2 mugs of tea in her hand, she put one mug down on the desk for her husband Walter to enjoy. But her husband had stopped tidying up the desk. He appeared to be holding a letter up in his hands, and when Samantha saw what he was flapping up and down, and the beautiful curly black writing on the page, she wanted the ground to swallow her up whole. How had her husband got his hands on that letter from Timothy? She thought she had hidden the letter discreetly in its safe hiding place in the secret panel in the old worn-out desk, but now the letter she knew that she should have burnt up a long time ago was in her husband's hands. This was an absolute nightmare. If Walter had read that letter, would their lives ever be the same again after this? She didn't think so. This was the line in the sand that should never have been crossed. Pretty shadows from the torchlight flickered around the room. Samantha began trembling uncomfortably, her eyes fixating on the letter that Walter was holding up in his hands. If only she could close her eyes and wish away this moment, or pop into a time machine and transport herself back just an hour earlier. Indeed, she was so seized with trepidation, she was surprised she hadn't spilled tea all over her husband's lap, and succeeded in burning him when she'd placed the mug on top of the desk. The fact that the tea had remained in the cup was, in fact, a miracle in itself. Walter's steely grey eyes had grown as cold as a marble slab, and they appeared to be drilling into hers questioningly, almost as if he knew exactly what she'd done, but wanted to hear her admit it to him. Was the cat really out of the bag now? It would seem so. Could she make any excuses that would remove the overwrought expression growing on Walter's face, that, like a burgeoning vine, was becoming increasingly more formidable? "What the hell is this?" he said very quietly. "Who is Timothy? Is what he's saying in the letter true? Please God, Sammy, Tell me it's not true. I don't want to believe this could be true. Please, Sammy, tell me what I'm reading is not true. Please, Walter, I can explain. It's not what you think. It was just, a once-off thing, for old time's sake, Nothing more or less. Timothy, I've known him all my life. You remember him. He was my first love. He was into antiquities. He spent a lot of time in Egypt. He still does, I believe. He travels all around the globe, investigating antiquities and, history, stuff like that. You're talking about Timothy that's into Egyptology, ancient artifacts. He travels the world. This is the Timothy you're talking about. He's the one that wrote you this letter.
Samantha nodded.
That's the Timothy I'm talking about. Yes, it's him. You better explain what's going on here, Sammy. Because I'm not happy about what I've just read. So you better have a good excuse for this. I'm listening hard.
What Sammy said next sent an eruption of anger shooting through Walter's body, rather like an unexploded landmine that had been dormant for many years, but one little trigger on the pulse, and it is set blazingly alight. What his wife was telling him, no man should ever have to hear from the woman he loves, more than life itself. But Sammy's words cut indiscriminately, through bone, marrow, and sinew. They were brutal to hear, by any manner of means. The sound that came out of Walter Harris's mouth was almost a roar. For a man who was composed and kept his temper in check, that noise that he made that night was more like a strangled cry of a wild animal, in great distress, that had been ensnared in a trap, was crying out in pain because it was badly injured. She had never heard her husband cry out like this. It was the most awful sound she had ever heard.
Why would you do this to me, Sammy? Am I not enough for you? Are we not enough? Of course you're enough, Walter. I told you, Timothy was just a friend. A friend? You call him a friend? When he writes letters like this to you?
Walter got up and walked over to his wife. He shook her shoulders hard. He'd never ever laid a finger on Sammy before, but he was so mad that he found himself shaking her in frustration. But he wasn't actually physically hurting her, but his distress was making Samantha very upset.
Please don't, Walter. Let's talk about this, shall we?
Austin, Samantha's 17-year-old son, sat up in bed with a start. He had heard a strange, strangled cry coming from inside the house. It sounded like an animal in distress. Or was it a nightmare that he'd been having? He couldn't be certain. He perked up from his sleeping position to listen more attentively. He heard the sound again. It was one of the scariest sounds he had ever heard. But in his dazed, rather sleepy state, he scrambled out of bed as quickly as he could. He had sensed that something was up in the house. It was in darkness, of course, and he remembered this when he reached for the electric switch to switch it on. Damn, he thought. He'd have to navigate his way around the house, rather like a blind man. Austin had an overactive imagination on him at the very best of times, and with the dark music he listened to, he'd often envisaged nightmare scenarios being played out in real life, like murders and violent crimes. Whether Austin knew it or not, the music that he listened to every day was having an unhealthy, rather negative effect on his psyche. It didn't help, of course, that his best friend Ivan was heavily invested in the occult. Austin could not comprehend why Ivan was so fascinated in all things outer-worldly. Whether he knew it or not, his friend's dark obsession was impacting his life, not in a positive way. He instinctively picked up his baseball bat that was next to his wardrobe and clutched it tightly in his hands. He began to cautiously creep down the hallway. The strangled cries were coming from his mother's study. Was his mother in trouble or something? Was somebody trying to hurt her? A feeling of overwhelming dread overcame him. He knew his mother would often work in her study late into the night, long after everybody else had long since retired to bed. His mother suffered from a raging insomnia. He had no idea what his mother got up to when she stayed up so late. Sometimes she could be found working on her sewing machine or cooking late into the night. But he knew she had a penchant for cutting out recipes from magazines and sticking them into an old scrapbook of hers. It was so dark he could barely see his hand in front of his face. The grandfather clock in the hall had just struck 2 minutes past 12 o'clock. It was past midnight. Austin was certain his father had long since retired to bed, as he had work in the morning. But his mother was probably still up and about, struggling to get to sleep as usual. He felt bad for her, having laid into her so hard over dinner that evening. But it was her fault that they had had a power failure. Suddenly he stood very still and took in a deep breath, his whole body trembling with trepidation. He heard the strangled cry again, and then his mother's pleading voice saying, "Please don't! Please don't!" Austin immediately believed his mother was in imminent danger. She sounded desperately afraid. "Oh my God," he thought. "Should I go and get Dad, wake him up and tell her there's an intruder in our home, attacking our mother?" There had been newspaper reports of a lone gunman holding up families in the area. He had tied them down with cable ties and threatened them with his Glock 9mm gun, and caused distress in his wake. Had the man targeted their household, he wondered. There was no time to lose. Tonight Austin was going to be a hero and bring down the predator the police had been looking for quite some time. That was when Austin saw his quintessential opportunity. There was the figure, towering over his mother and appearing to be shaking her. But it was so dark he could barely see what was going on, but he could feel the danger. His mother cried out again, "Please, don't be like this! Don't be like this!" Austin courageously, following his instincts, lunged towards the figure that had been shaking his mother, and with one mighty wallop, the baseball bat he was carrying went thundering down on the back of the man's head. The figure collapsed to the ground in a sorry heap, and he heard his mother screaming, "What the hell have you done, Austin? What have you done?" 20 years later, Albright's account. I stood there in my mother's kitchen, slicing a large sweet juicy beef tomato with a sharp blade. The sweet juices ran out of the tomato, spilling over the wooden chopping board. I lay the slices between 2 slices of buttered brown bread, sprinkling them with copious amounts of salt and black pepper. I knew I needed to eat. I had barely eaten a thing in days, but I felt nauseous, and it didn't help that a thunderous headache boomed in my head day and night. I needed to keep up my strength. I glanced out of the kitchen window. It was such a prepossessing day, really beautiful. The sunlight spilled generously through the window, and our cat Chesterfield was contentedly licking his chops on the window seat and basking joyfully in the sun. He looked the picture of perfect contentment, as if nothing frazed him at all. I envied him for being so chilled, as I was feeling anything but. I continued to look out of the kitchen window. I could observe the woods that fringed the borders of our property, and found myself reminiscing about my early childhood, where I had spent an excessive amount of time playing in those woods with my little doll Candy Floss, where we would become entrenched in our make-believe world together. I would have tea parties for Candy Floss under the trees, because growing up my brother Austin, being so much older than me, meant there were times I would be very lonely and have to keep to myself. So I used to entertain myself over the long lonely hours to brighten up my little world. I was hoping that the tomato sandwich might revive my flailing appetite, as in the past I had always found a tomato sandwich irresistibly difficult to refuse. But even the sweet, tempting juices of the tomato failed to titillate my taste buds. It was difficult to be hungry in my circumstances when I was watching my mother losing her battle against breast cancer. I knew she had hours left to live, and for the last couple of days I had not heard a peep out of her, for she had slipped into a deep sleep from which she had barely stirred. Apart from the occasional mumble and a little tossing and turning here and there, of course. I noticed her breathing patterns had changed significantly over the last few hours, which the nurse assured me meant there was not long left until my mother Sammy finally breathed her very last. I had contacted my brother Austin, and he said he'd be here soon, but he was taking his time to get here, and I was extremely worried that by the time he arrived on the scene, my mother would have long since gone. He was flying to Tanasket, which is a rural town in Washington state, situated on the Okanagan River, not far from the Canadian border. It's about 3 hours north-west of Spokane, and 4 hours northeast of Seattle. The town is situated in the mountains, and to get there you will find yourself travelling down a tumultuous tumble of mountain roads. I was born in Spokane and lived there until I was only 8 years old, but I only really remember life in this rural town, which invites a fabulous outdoor lifestyle, with fishing and hunting opportunities, if you are that way inclined. On many occasions I had the privilege to go fishing with my brother Austin here, and had successfully caught some pretty hefty-looking pike that had seriously impressed my Aunt Heidi when she was alive. My mother had moved into Heidi's house with her sister after my father Walter disappeared from our lives, never to be seen again. My mother and brother preferred not to talk about my father, and it would drive me mad, because my blistered memories of him were so vague and indistinct. The police had investigated my father's disappearance. His car was found on the Mexican border, lying abandoned, with a note in my father's handwriting saying, "I'm sorry. Don't try and find me. It's better this way. Remember, I love you all very much." The police believed my father had deliberately broken away from our lives, like a wild horse bolting free from the stable. It was believed my father chose to disappear because the responsibilities of his life had consumed him all too much, and his boringly tedious job at the bank that he loathed had been the final straw. "I'm afraid, ma'am, it's more common than you know," the police officer had assured my mother Sammy. "We have reason to believe your husband chose to disappear from your life, to begin a new life for himself. I very much doubt he was met with foul play. The note he left affirms he just does not want to be found. I guess we should respect his decision, as he is an adult after all, and entitled to make his own choices in life. Was your husband, ma'am, suffering from depression at the time?" she was asked.
Well, I know my husband wasn't desperately happy with his job. I did try to ask him about it, officer, on so many occasions, and he would shut me down. He would say it was as boring as watching paint dry. So I didn't bother to ask him much about it. But I didn't get the impression he was desperately happy with his job. So I guess maybe he was down, but I didn't see it. But even if he was like that, why would he leave us, officer, like this in the lurch? It makes absolutely no sense to me. Walter was an adoring, devoted family man who would have done almost anything for his family. So why would he leave us like this?"
The police officer had nodded his head, as if the very gesture affirmed that he expected as much.
"Well, there you go, ma'am. You almost answered your own question. You yourself were saying he wasn't desperately happy with his job at the bank. There is nothing worse in this life, ma'am, than doing a job you loathe. And for some people it can get all too much for them. I've seen it before, you know, and I'll see it again. One never knows, ma'am, the inner turmoil that some people go through, because they keep it all to themselves. I imagine your husband was rather reserved, a quiet, demure man." "Exactly. He was like that. He didn't like to express his emotions very much. He was very introvert." "Well, there you go again, ma'am. People have left their family for all kinds of reasons, I'm afraid. We've seen it in the force all the time. It's not that uncommon, you know. Don't blame yourself, ma'am, for any of this. Many people choose to disappear, and there really isn't a damn thing you can do about it. If they don't want to be found, then they won't be found. So leave them be. But you never know. One of these days, when your husband is settled, he might get in touch with you and the family."
I had no memory of my father. It saddened me to think that his life had been so hard for him, that he had chosen to leave us in the way he did. I do remember doing research on the matter, and discovered, to my shock, that even in Japan, people very often choose to abandon their old lives and their family. They begin a new life, starting somewhere fresh. Had my father done the very same thing? Was he really that miserable living with us? I had missed my father growing up, only because, like all other kids, I knew I wanted to have a father figure in my life. My mother's sister Heidi had been 8 years her senior, and had passed away from breast cancer 5 years prior. She had actually worked for the sheriff's office for quite some time. Her mediocre house in the small rural town, to which we had grown extremely attached, had been left to my mother in Aunt Heidi's will. It would seem a long line of female family members had died of cancer. My mother's doctors had advised my mother to have a radical mastectomy after her sister's diagnosis, claiming my mother had the very same genetic gene that predisposed her to getting breast cancer. And she didn't listen to any well-meaning advice. My mother had simply refused to be mutilated, but her refusal to get a radical mastectomy as a preventative anti-cancer measure had now cost her her life. I was horrified to think that if she had had the radical surgery in the first place, there was a jolly good chance that she would still be fighting fit and very much alive. I was clandestinely rather mad at her for not taking the sound medical preventative measures that she had been advised to take by her oncologist. My mother just hated the idea of having her body pierced and prodded. I guess I understood where she was coming from on that. I was heartily relieved myself that I didn't carry this unfortunate gene, or I also would have been persuaded to have a radical mastectomy. It was devastating to see my mother deteriorate like this, at such a rapidly fast pace. The cancer that had laid claim to her life was one of the most aggressive forms of cancer the doctors had ever seen. My mother refused to go to a hospice. She opted instead to die in the comfort of her home. I entered my mother's bedroom rather reluctantly. It's funny, but when someone is dying, there's a sickly sweet smell that you pick up. You can feel the sickness almost overtake the entire room. It's exceedingly oppressive, almost as if it's closing in on you. I entered the room with a sandwich in my hand, which I knew I would never get to eat. I gestured to the nurse to take a break. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "It's not going to be very long now." "Please don't say that. My brother's not here yet," I said. "I hope he gets here in time. He's flying in from Nevada." "Well, let's hope that she'll hold on until then," said the nurse, "so that your brother has a chance to say his farewell to her. Sometimes they wait, you know, until everyone has said their piece, and then they go." "I hope you're right," I said. I wanted Austin to have an opportunity to say goodbye to Mum. He was so close to her. It will break his heart if he's not here when she passes away. Could my mother hold on for a little longer? I wasn't sure. "I know this is hard on you, Albright," said the nurse sympathetically, "but keep strong." I was heartily relieved when finally the taxi rolled up to our front door, and I observed the tall, lanky figure of my brother climbing out of the car. He looked apprehensive as he glanced towards the house. I hadn't seen Austin in 6 months, but he was as ruggedly handsome as ever, and was stylishly dressed in some trendy chinos and a smart navy blue jacket that was covered in silver zippers. I knew what he was thinking. He was praying with all his heart that my mother was still alive, so that he could get to say his goodbyes to her. I wanted to run out of the doors to greet him, to throw my arms around him, to welcome him back home, but instead I remained rigidly stiff in my mother's bedroom, unable to move a muscle, as the nurse scurried off to the front door to welcome my brother in. "Albright! The best news ever! Your brother's taxi is here! He's arrived! This is great news! Our prayers have been answered!" I guess with my brother Austin arriving at the house, the reality that my mother would shortly expire hit me hard. It wouldn't be long until she was finally gone from our lives for good, and then all that would be left of the Harris family would be me and my brother. I could hear a suitcase being flung down in the hallway, and my brother dashing as fast as he could through the house into my mother's bedroom. And there he was, standing in the doorway. I looked up at him without saying a single word, but our eyes met. "How is she?" "She's still here," I whispered. "You got here in the nick of time, thank God." "It's not going to be long now, Austin. I'm so afraid. I'm dreading this moment when she's gone from our lives for good." "Thank God I got here in time." My brother rushed over to grab a chair, and he drew it to my mother's side of the bed and sat down on it, holding my mother's thin hand in his. Mum, it's me." In that extraordinary moment, my mother suddenly sat up from her bed upright. She appeared wide awake and alert. I was absolutely astounded. In fact, I thought I was going to pass out in shock. My mother had been out of the count for several days now. But now that Austin had arrived, she had arisen from her slumber, like a phoenix from the ashes. "You're here, Austin. Oh, I've
been waiting for you to come,"
she cried out happily, her face breaking out into a warm smile.
"Oh, I'm so glad you're here. I knew you wouldn't let me down."
She then flopped back on her pillow and mumbled,
"You have to tell Albright the truth about her father. Promise me you'll tell her the truth. It's very important. Promise me. Promise me, Austin." "I promise, Mum. Don't you worry. I will tell her absolutely everything. I just want you to know, Mum, we love you so much. We really, really do." "Oh, I'm so glad you came. You need to tell Albright. I won't be able to rest in peace if you don't." "Mum, don't you worry about it. I will tell her everything. You're a good boy, Austin. A very good boy. Just like your father you are. Oh, I'm so tired. I'm so tired."
Moments later, with one final breath, my mother breathed her very last. That was when Austin took me into his arms lovingly, and we cried and cried. For how long, I don't actually know, but in truth it felt like a lifetime. After my mother's body had finally been escorted away from the house in a funeral van, my brother took my hand, gave it a tight squeeze, and said, "Let's go, Albright. How about we go and get some waffles and ice cream? We need cheering up. Besides, I've got some things I need to talk to you about. Things I need to tell you." "You mean about my father?" I asked him. "Mum was saying you needed to tell me about Dad." Austin nodded at me. There was a sadness in his eyes. I was puzzled and rather bewildered by this. I wondered if my father, who had disappeared for so long on the Mexican border, had suddenly got in contact after all these years again. But I had not prepared myself for what Austin would ultimately tell me.
Austin's account. I knew that telling my sister Albright that our father had not really disappeared all those years ago, and that me, my mother, and Aunt Heidi had staged his vanishing in order to protect me from the criminal justice system, for there are no guarantees how things would have panned out for me if we hadn't artfully covered our tracks. Aunt Heidi had worked for the sheriff's office. She knew a thing or two about staging a disappearance, which was why my mother had sought her ardent advice. While Aunt Heidi insisted I'd never have gone to prison, that my father's death would probably be viewed as involuntary manslaughter. But she perfectly understood my mother's need to cover this all up. Mothers by nature have an intrinsic need to protect their own young from whatever harm might befall them, and the last thing that my mother wanted for my life was for my reputation to be sullied forever. If the truth got out, tongues might wag, and some people falsely believe I had intentionally harmed my own father, which was absolutely not the case. Dad did not vanish all those years ago, I said to Albright bluntly, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief to tell my sister the truth. We were sitting at the diner in town, tucking heartily into waffles with maple syrup and ice cream. I had figured out we'd need something sweet when I told my sister the story, because this was not going to be an easy story to tell, and I had no way of knowing how Albright would react to what I had to convey. But I had promised my mother, in her dying moments, that I would tell Albright everything about my father. Albright spontaneously dropped her fork on her plate, wiping away the excess of maple syrup from her mouth, and looking up at me with wide, very questioning eyes.
"What are you talking about, Austin? You don't know what you're saying. Don't you remember Dad disappeared years ago? Because being a father and working for a job at the bank that he loathed, it made him fall into a deep depression. And he needed to escape from it all. That's why he left us. Don't you remember Mum telling us all about it? The police were very, very sorry about what had happened, but they said he'd chosen to disappear. And this happens more often than people know."
I remember all that incredibly well, Albright. But what I'm trying to tell you is that Dad's disappearance was staged. Me, Mum, and Aunt Heidi staged his disappearance. I know this is hard for you to hear, sis, but this is the God-honest truth.
I don't understand. You staged Dad's disappearance, chided Albright. But why would you do such a bizarre thing?
Because, Albright, Dad never left us. He would never have done so. He adored us, and would have done practically anything for his family, and especially for you, Albright. You were the apple of his eye. He was tickled pink when you were born. I remember that very well. He was one kind, very remarkable man, and there isn't a day that goes by that I don't desperately miss him.
But what are you saying? What exactly do you mean? Where is Dad, then? Asked Albright,
her eyes staring into mine. He's dead. I'm sorry, Albright. I said, my eyes glistening with tears. I didn't want to have to tell you this, but I promised Mum on her dying bed that I would, and so there it is.
Dad is dead? Asked Albright, repeating the words as if the idea that her father was dead was a foreign concept that she could not possibly comprehend. But why? Why did he die? She asked. I don't understand. Was he sick or something?
No, he wasn't sick. He was a very healthy man.
Well, then what was wrong with him?
I killed him, Albright. That is what happened.
You what?
Asked Albright, looking so astounded that her eyes were the size of large dinner plates.
You killed Dad? But why would you do that?
It was a terrible accident, Albright. I need you to believe me on this one. I never meant to kill our father. If you must know, I believed he was an intruder who had broken into the house. Do you remember you were 8 years old at the time? We were living in Spokane. You got excited that night because we were eating dinner by candlelight, because the power company had disconnected us from the grid, because Mum forgot to pay the electric bill. You thought eating by candlelight was charming and magical.
Yes, I do remember that, but my memory's a bit vague.
Do you remember at the time in Spokane? There were a couple of people in our neighbourhood, a couple of families, you could say, who were held up by a lone armed robber who stole all their valuables and very much threatened their lives. Do you remember that?
Well, I remember hearing something about it, but what has that got to do with anything?
Well, that night when I returned to bed, I was awakened by a very strange noise. I thought someone was being murdered, and I don't say that lightly. I immediately thought that that lone gunman had broken into our house and had ambushed Mum, given she was probably still awake due to suffering from insomnia. In a panic, I dashed to Mum's office. I was carrying a baseball bat in my hands as a means of defence. I had heard the sound coming from the office. It was so dark because of the power failure, so I couldn't see much, but someone was shaking Mum. I thought they were threatening her and hurting her. It turns out I was wrong about this. Mum was not being hurt at all, but in the darkness things can get extremely distorted and confusing. She was saying, "Please don't! Don't! Please don't!" I thought Mum was being attacked by an intruder. It never occurred to me that it was Dad that was shaking her. He wasn't shaking her violently. He wasn't hurting her. But it didn't look good in that light. So I rushed forwards with all guns blazing and thumped the intruder across the back of the head with the baseball bat, without thinking straight about what I was doing. I just hoped to knock him out. I didn't intend to harm the intruder, but unfortunately I messed up Albright.
So it wasn't an intruder, said my sister. It was Dad. You killed Dad with a baseball bat.
My sister, Albright, threw an astonished hand over her mouth.
But I don't understand. Why was Dad shaking Mum in the first place? That's not the sort of thing he would have done.
That's the whole point, Albright. Dad never laid a finger once on Mum. That was why I was absolutely certain, without a shadow of doubt, that the intruder was shaking Mum. It turns out, while Dad was looking for the electric bill that night to pay, well, he stumbled across something far worse
in that walnut desk of Mother's."
"He did?"
asked Aubrey.
"What did he find?"
"A letter written to Mum from her first love, a man called Timothy. He was asking Mum in the letter if you were his daughter. You see, Albright, I regret to say this to you, but Mum had a night of passion with someone she has always loved. Someone who refused to marry her, because his biggest passion in life was ancient artifacts and stuff like that. This man's job took him around the world. He knew that such a lifestyle would be no life for Mother. Dad didn't know any of this. When Dad read the letter, he lost it, because he thought you, the very apple of his eye, might not be his little girl. But he'd also just discovered that his wife had cheated on him, and it broke his heart, as it naturally would."
"Oh, my God! Please don't tell me that Dad isn't my real father. For God's sake, don't tell me that. I don't think I could handle that if you did, because Dad is the only dad I've ever known, and I don't want anybody else to be my father."
"Of course you're Dad's daughter. There's no dispute about that. You even look exactly like him. But Mum did DNA tests a long time ago, and it affirmed you were Dad's child. But when Dad read the letter, you can only imagine what was going through his mind. I heard his cries in the house. It sounded like a trapped animal that was being murdered. The sounds did not come from Mum at all. They came from our father."
"And you thought the sounds were coming from Mum, and that she was crying out in terror?"
"Exactly."
"Then you heard her saying, 'Please don't, please don't,' and you naturally assumed the worst?"
"Pretty much."
"What a mess! And on top of it all, there had to be a power failure that night in our home, so you couldn't see a single thing. Talk about an unfortunate set of circumstances."
I proceeded to tell my sister Albright the entire story. I can't honestly remember whether we ate those waffles or not, but we were most certainly the very last people to leave the diner that afternoon. I felt much lighter being able to offload the truth to my sister about what had really happened to her father all those years ago. Growing up, she'd asked so many questions about him, and we'd always brushed her off. My sister told me she believed Mum had done the right thing in burying Dad's body in the way she'd done in the woods.
"It was an accident. The trouble is, people would always wonder, wouldn't they, if the truth got out? I mean, even if you were charged only with manslaughter, which would likely be the case, people would still point a finger and say, 'I wonder if he actually did it on purpose.' And wherever you go, people who didn't know you would cast doubt on your character. Because whether you like it or not, Austin, mud sticks, and people are so quick to judge and believe the worst of you. Dad would never have wanted any of that for you. He would have approved with what Mum did. And had I been your mother, I would have done the exact same thing to protect you. Any mother with any decency would do the same."
She paused for a brief moment and said,
"Do you know whereabouts in the woods Dad is buried? Because I'd very much like to go and pay my respects to him if I may."
"I do know where Dad is buried. It's close to the house. But it's probably not a good idea for you to go to the spot."
"But why not?"
she asked me, looking perplexed.
"You're making absolutely no sense, Austin."
"I'd rather you didn't go into the woods," I said tentatively, deciding that there were some things that were probably best not divulged. I didn't exactly want to tell my sister the terrifying thing that had happened to me and my good friend Ivan when we were messing around in the woods near where Dad was buried. My sister pulled a contorted face.
"If you don't show me where Dad is buried, I'll find the place myself. I'll go and look for him."
"Good luck with that. Mum and Heidi are the only two people who know where his resting place is. And if I don't tell you where it is, then you shall never find it. And I can promise you that."
"Why are you being like this, Austin? Don't I deserve to lay some flowers down at the place where Dad is buried? I think I have a right to do that, don't you? You and Mum and Heidi kept so many secrets from me. You owe me this."
"I'll think about it. But you know something, Albright. You don't have to visit a burial place to remember our father. I'm sure wherever you go, no matter what you say to him, he will ultimately hear you. The dead are never very far from us. I certainly believe that. In truth, I can't bear to look back on the dreadful night the lights went out in our home in Spokane, Washington, because when the lights went out on that night, so did the biggest light of them all, and that light would never come on again. That was the light of my beloved father. I marvel at how I could have been so incredibly foolish. I had bulldozed into a very tense, overwrought situation, rather like an elephant in a china shop. I had read everything wrong, mistaking the man that was shaking my mother to be that of a villainous thug that had broken into our house in the middle of the night. How could I have been so stupid? There had, of course, been a couple of armed robberies in our neighbourhood. I naively assumed that our house had been targeted next by the thug in question, who was probably taking advantage of our power failure, and who the police were looking for. We knew the man was working on his own, stealing valuables from people's homes in our neighbourhood. The tragedy was he was never found. My mother knew the Peking family that had been held to ransom by this insidious guy. The man had tied up the couple with cable ties. He had threatened to kill them. He was described as armed and dangerous, as well as mentally disturbed. My parents had even been discussing getting an alarm system installed, as such was their concern over the recent spate of robberies that had edged on the verge of really bad violence. I thought my mother had confronted this thug in the middle of the night, and as a consequence was fighting for her life, because of the strangled cries I'd heard. My mother was the type of woman who would never go down without a big fight. I thought someone had broken into our house, and my mother would not have been afraid to stand up for herself. Growing up, my father had never laid a finger on my mother, so when I'd woken from my sweet slumber and heard that terrifying screeching sound coming from my mother's study, I knew at once, well, at least I assumed, my mother was in grievous trouble. Little did I know, of course, that the wail did not come from my mother's mouth, but from my dad, who had cried out in emotional turmoil. When my mother told him the truth that was so dreadful, it probably pierced through his heart, tearing it so cruelly into shreds. I'll never forget the sound my father made, as long as I live. It sounded like someone was being physically attacked and murdered at the same time. I thought it was my mother being killed, and that the armed thug had finally broken into our house. At that very impressionable time of my young life, I relentlessly listened to heavy metal music. I would tune in to crime documentaries on television for my entertainment, and I hung around with my friend Ivan, who was fascinated by all things esoteric. I was not in a good place at the time, going through all those teenage emotions, with hormones raging all over the place. So hearing that noise in our house meant the fear of God went coursing through every vein in my body, because I naturally dreamed the very worst was happening, because when you surround yourself with darkness, it's very difficult to see the light. My mother had been a raging insomniac for so many years. She would spend so many antisocial hours of the night up and about doing stuff around the house. She would play the piano in her study, make jello in the kitchen, or anything else. She would often work on her patchwork eiderdown on her sewing machine. She would find things to do to while away the long lonely hours of the night, while the rest of the family happily slept along. My mother could be quite a scatterbrain at the best of times. I often put this unfortunate character trait of hers down to her fragmented sleeping patterns and a lack of good quality sleep. On this evening I sat up in my bed with ears perked forward, like a highly attentive guard dog. I had some harrowing visions of this armed robber that had tied poor Mrs. Peking down, now holding my mother down in her office. I could imagine my mother putting up quite some fight and not cooperating at all with the robber. And when you behave like that, you can provoke the perpetrator to murder. I was not surprised that sleep had eluded her, as she was in quite the state that evening after the blackout we had endured, and blamed herself for failing to pay the electric bill. I will admit I was hopping mad with my mother at the time for her foolish oversight, but now I knew I needed to see what on earth was going on in the study, because whatever it was, it didn't sound good. I climbed very discreetly out of my bed, being as quiet as I possibly could. I grabbed my baseball bat in my hands. My heart pounded in my chest. I tiptoed cautiously down the hallway and peered into my mother's study. The torch was perched on the desk, but it was facing away from the two dark silhouettes, so I couldn't see them clearly. I observed one figure was my mother, who I recognized instantly, and when I saw the man standing over her and shaking her in the darkness, I couldn't see him clearly. Had I done so, I would have almost certainly recognized him as my father, for my father's features, even in the dark, would have been very distinctive, because he was a very tall man. My mother was begging this man to stop, but I went straight for him with a baseball bat, whacking him on the back of the head. I had no intention of killing this man. I was hoping he'd just black out, and then we would call the police. The man fell backwards onto the floor with a mighty walloping thump, and to my horror, I realized that not only had I knocked this man out, but I'd killed him in the process. I guess I'd been oblivious of my own strength. When I cast the torchlight over his face, this time I was the one that let out an animalistic howl. "Oh, my God! No! No!" I cried out. I had only just killed my father. We may have had our differences, and I was a petulant, difficult teenager at the time, but I loved my father almost more than life itself. So there are no words to express the horror of such a terrifying moment. I would have traded places with my father in a second, as the guilt of what I had done has been a life sentence for me that I carry with me every single day of my life, like an indelible scar that is never allowed to heal. My mother, of course, cried out in horror, as you would have expected. "What have you done, Austin, to your father? What have you done? You've only gone and killed him. How could you do this? How could you do this?" "I thought a man was hurting you, Mum," I said lamely. "Dad was shaking you. He's never done that before. I thought your life was in danger. I heard your cries." "It wasn't me you heard crying, Austin. It was your father. He was in great distress. He was shaking me as a consequence. I told him to stop, but he wasn't hurting me at all. He was just very upset with me, and I can't blame him for that." I was to learn later from my mother that my father was the one that had let out a strangled cry, because he discovered a letter written to her from a man called Timothy, who was asking if Albright was his daughter. My mother had been with Timothy for one night years before, and Timothy, when hearing that my mother had an 8-year-old daughter, did the math and wondered if he was Albright's father. Of course, when my father read Timothy's letter, written in an exquisite black curly italic-like writing that expressed his undying love for my mother, that was when my father realized that his beloved daughter Albright might not be his own daughter, and that my mother had cheated on him at least once. I guess he just lost it. That's why he was shaking my mother. To express, I imagine, his indignation. He was absolutely devastated to discover my mother had not been faithful during their marriage, although, according to my mother, she insisted she had only cheated on my father once, and I believe her on this. But that did not make what she did remotely right. I imagine no man wants to learn that the child they love more than life itself might not actually be their own. My mother explained to me that she had been to school with Timothy. They had fallen in love with each other. Timothy had gone to Staten University and had succeeded in all his endeavours. He was incredibly bright. He went on to travel the world, explore ancient historic sites, be involved in archaeological digs, and clean up old manuscripts with his skilled hand. He also worked with the Cairo Museum in Egypt. Timothy had told my mother in no uncertain terms that although he loved her very much, that he was not the settling down type, and that he would never marry her. I'm passionate about history and ancient artifacts, he told her. I'm not the kind of person that would be relationship worthy, because if I were with you, I would leave you on your own for long stretches of time, and that would not be fair on you, Sammy. I would always put my research before you, and we could never have children like regular couples do, because we would be travelling all over the world. These things would consume my focus, and it would not be fair on you. Furthermore, I love you too much, Sammy, to allow you to ruin your life on my account, or to give up everything for me. It would be selfish of me to expect too much from you like this. You might end up despising me because of it. No woman ever wants to feel ignored, unloved, and neglected. And if you marry me, that's how you would feel. I want you to fall in love with someone who deserves you. That will make you happy. Knowing that someone is taking good care of you will make me very happy indeed. Even though my mother had cut all ties with Timothy, years later they met up in Spokane for a secret rendezvous, as my mother was desperate to see him once again and catch up with old news. One thing, of course, led to another, and they had spent a night of passion together in a hotel room for old time's sake, rekindling old memories. I love your father, Austin. Well, I loved him. But don't get me wrong, she told me, with tears of great regret in her eyes. But I could never get over Timothy. I just couldn't. I would have gone with him to the ends of the earth, you know, and back if I had to. Timothy refused to commit to me. It was so devastating for me, because I would have done anything for him. He was the love of my life. But his love was ancient antiquities. It was his greatest interest, and I know, in truth, I would have always come second for him. I knew that, of course, but I never stopped loving him nevertheless. But he was right about everything. If I had married him, it would have been a nightmare. We'd have probably ended up getting divorced anyway, because with him never settling down in one place for very long, it would have been a disaster. I need to be rooted in one spot to be happy. All that travel would have been very unsettling. So tell me this, Mum. Did you really love Dad? Or was he just second best to you because you couldn't have Timothy? But of course I loved your father, more than anything. And I have to say, after I met up with Timothy in that hotel room, it only confirmed to me just how much I really did love your father. I guess I always held a candle for Timothy, you see. I put him up on a pedestal. I don't think I've ever met anyone like him before. His passion for ancient mysteries and the old world was so intriguing. He was a fascinating man. I guess I was always drawn to the things I couldn't have. I never meant for things with Timothy to get so heated that night, not at all. Nor did he, for that matter. We simply arranged to meet at his hotel for an evening meal. It was perfectly innocent. But it was just so good to catch up with him, to learn all about what he was doing. I wanted to remain faithful to your father, but when we saw each other, we couldn't help ourselves. We were so drawn together, like old times, I expect. I'm not proud of what I did. So then, Mum, is Albright Timothy's daughter? I asked. Is she my half-sister? No, of course she's not. She's your father's girl. I had a DNA test done a long time ago, because Timothy needed to know the truth. I was relieved to see Albright was your father's. And if the truth be told, so was Timothy, if you must know. I absolutely believe such knowledge would have dismantled his life if he was to discover that he was a father. He'd have felt a duty of obligation towards his daughter, and a need to be involved in her life, because he was that kind of a man. I try not to remember how I did feel on the night when I discovered that I'd accidentally killed my father. I thought he'd been an intruder. I had wailed, "I'm so sorry, Mum. What have I done? Am I going to go to jail for the rest of my life?" "Absolutely not," my mother had said firmly. "Your father would never want that for you, and nor would I.
We're going to have to make it look like your father disappeared. I'll phone my sister Heidi to ask her what we should do about this. Your Aunt Heidi is as sharp as a hawk. She'll know exactly what we need to do. Don't forget she worked for the sheriff's office for quite a while. She'll help us cover our tracks methodically. I know she will. As far as I'm concerned, I don't want the police crawling over this like maggots, over a dead man's corpse. Even if you were to go down for involuntary manslaughter as a minor, I don't trust the police as far as you can throw them. These days, innocent people are locked up for very insignificant things. And then you get the nefarious kids of wealthy parents that get away with their insidious deeds every single time. Because they're elites, and they can get away with practically anything. You hear about it all over the news. And even our own leaders have their hands covered in filth. But they get away with what they do. You did nothing wrong, son. You made a perfectly innocent mistake. And you should not be punished for that under any circumstances as far as I'm concerned. Yes, I'm devastated your father is dead, and so are you. But we can't cry over spilt milk. What's done is done. We need to be practical about this. And your Aunt Heidi knows practicality as if it's her second name. But, Mum, don't you get it? I killed Dad. Sweetheart, I keep repeating this over and over again. It was a dreadful accident. The trouble is, love, the world is not a fair place. We all know that. So you do what you need to do to survive, to protect your family. You will not stay a day in a juvenile detention center over my dead body if I have anything to do with it. We both know this was an accident, but things can get insanely twisted, love. And before you know it, you'll be falsely accused of murder with intent. You don't know the way things will pan out for you. And I'm not prepared to take any risks as far as you're concerned. I don't want your life needlessly ruined by this oversight. Nor would your father. He'd be the first to want me to take care of this unfortunate situation. If it hadn't been for that damn power outage, you'd have likely seen it was your father shaking me. We've all been very nervous lately, and understandably so, knowing full well that that thug is out there, breaking into people's houses, holding them hostage. Oh, goodness gracious me, is it any wonder you panicked and assumed the very worst? But try telling that to a court of law. They'd always twist things, because that's what they do so well. But I killed Dad, I wailed again. Mum, it makes me a murderer. You are not a murderer, Austin. You hear me, said my mother, now cradling me in her arms very lovingly, and rocking me gently, as she had done when I was a baby boy. You may be many things, Austin, and I don't deny you can be an obnoxious teenager at the best of times. Let's not kid, but your heart has always been in the right place, and underneath it all you're a very good boy. You thought I was being attacked. You came to my rescue, and I'm proud of you for that. It showed bravery and courage. You weren't aware of your own strength when you lashed out at your father. But we'll get over this, son, like we get over everything in our lives. Every hurdle in the road, we always overcome it. I know this is going to be a very hard time for us, love, but we've got to be courageous about this. Your father is out of the picture now. I'm sure he's very happy where he is. But we're the ones that have to get on with our lives. And while we'll miss your father with all of our hearts, we cannot allow our grief to rob us of our daily joy. Do you understand? It's very important. Dad would be the first person to insist upon this. I had nodded. I knew my mother was absolutely right. It was a very tumultuous time for the all of us. Aunt Heidi had arrived at our house at the crack of dawn, hours after my father had died, in her rather rusted-out old van that had almost certainly seen better days, and would have probably looked better on a scrap heap. Me and my Aunt Heidi surreptitiously loaded my father's dead corpse into the back of the van, and we ferried him to the town of Tanasket, where Aunt Heidi lived. Aunt Heidi had never been married.
She described herself as a self-confessed spinster who had no intention of tying the knot with anyone. She seemed to thrive on her independence. It was in the dead of night, on the following day, after my dad had accidentally been killed, that me, my mother, and Aunt Heidi surreptitiously buried my father in the woods at the back of Aunt Heidi's extensive property, where we had quite the funeral ceremony for him, laying down flowers on his grave, under the pearly light of the silvery moon. It was very magical and very emotional. Albright was there, of course, happily sticking flowers around the grave. She was only 8 years old at the time, naively unaware that beneath that mound of soil lay the remains of her father. She had no idea what was going on. It was strange to know that my father was under that mound of soil, but it felt as if he was with us. I could see him in my mind's eye, smiling at us warmly, giving us a thumbs up. We all cried so many tears that I was surprised I had anything left to cry in me. It had been a privilege to have a father like Walter, and I never was able to forgive myself for what I had done. It was ironic, because only weeks before my father's fortuitous passing, when me and my mother had visited Aunt Heidi, and had stayed in her house for the weekend with my father, we had all taken a casual walk in the woods at the back of the property, and my father had said to my mother, "This is the place I'd like to be buried one day, love. If you get me cremated, you can scatter me around here. I would like that very much." Little did my father know that he really would end up in these woods, his bones becoming one with the forest floor. He would have liked that, but it was far sooner than he would have ever imagined. But it certainly brought me solace that this was the place he had chosen to be, if given the choice. Shortly after my father died, my mother was very distraught, so she moved us away from our home in Spokane. We moved in with Aunt Heidi in the town of Tannisket, in the house we'd often visited for the weekends. I think my mother felt closer to my father, knowing he was buried close by in those woods, not far away from Aunt Heidi's very unremarkable-looking home. My mother was also glad to get away from Spokane, I believe, to be living in a very unpopulated and rural town, where she could grieve the loss of my dad in a very peaceful environment, where eyes were not permanently scrutinizing her every move. Everyone in our neighborhood in Spokane heard about my father's unfortunate disappearance. People looked on my mother pitifully, like the poor wronged wife who'd been miserably dumped and abandoned by her beloved husband, and left so badly in the lurch. They all thought it was out of character for my father to behave like this, and they were right about that. I am certain the gossip was rife, but the last thing my mother wanted was pity from the local people in our neighborhood, so moving away seemed like the most obvious thing for our family to do. I do know it was a relief living in such a delightful town, with so many exciting hiking trails and sporting activities on offer, that I could thoroughly enjoy, that would help me not get so caught up in those dark moments of desperate grief that had consumed my young heart. Aunt Heidi was wonderful to me. She was very sympathetic towards me and understood what I was going through. She made me feel right at home, and soon became like a second mother to me. I naturally missed all my friends from Spokane, most especially my close friend Ivan, whom I had not seen in quite some while. My mother was of course not best pleased when I invited him to spend the weekend with us. "Sweetheart, must you invite Ivan around?" she asked me lamely. "I just don't think it's a good idea." "Why not?" I demanded. "I know you don't like him, Mum. You've never liked him, but he's my friend." "Because, love, he's into all that, you know, all that really weird stuff that I just don't approve of." "He's interested in the occult, Mum. Why don't you just say it? Big deal. He's not hurting anyone, is he? Everyone's entitled to have a passion." "It is a big deal, love. It might seem innocent fun to you, but you can open doors to the demonic realms when you play with stuff like that. You can invite grievous trouble into your life, and after the fiasco over your father's passing, that is the last thing we need right now." "Really, Mum? Are you for real?
You don't really believe in all that woo-woo stuff, do you? I'm afraid I do, love. Furthermore, I don't think that Ivan is a positive influence on you. I'm sorry I don't. There it is, I've said it. I know it's not what you want to hear, but it needs to be said. When he was around, you were always listening to all that heavy metal music, and I'm sure it was because of his influences. It drove your father absolutely mad, as it did me. I may remind you that Ivan was slipping into cemeteries at the dead of night to talk to the dead. How do I know this? Because his mother confided in me about it. She told me everything. It freaked her the hell out. You have to admit, love, that is not normal behavior for a teenager. She caught him using one of those Ouija boards, would you believe it? Sometimes you teenagers have absolutely no idea what you're dabbling with, as common sense absolutely eludes you. I've seen it all the time. Poor Ivan's mother. She went through a hellish time, I can tell you. Very upset about the whole debacle, she was. Luckily, she got Ivan to speak to her pastor. Her pastor had a good talk with him. But my bet is he hasn't changed in the slightest. I'd put money on it. That's why I don't want him staying with us. I think I'm being perfectly reasonable about this. Don't be so mean about Ivan, Mum. You don't know him like I do, and he's got a good heart. I know he isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I like him a lot. It's not up to you to choose my friends, is it? Ivan and I, we go back a long time. He's like a brother to me. And so what if he's interested in cemeteries and stuff like that? It doesn't make him a bad person. He's just got an inquiring mind, that's all. He's interested in things you can't explain. And what's wrong with that? He's not hurting anyone. An inquiring mind? Is that what you call it, love? My mother scoffed. You know what? I blame those dreadful television programs on TV, with their ghost documentaries and investigations, feeding this generation with wild, nonsensical ideas that should be actively discouraged instead of encouraged in the way they are. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that Ivan is wild about the paranormal. It's ridiculous. Don't be so hard on Austin, Sammy, said my Aunt Heidi, coming to my immediate defence. She was good like that. Austin's entitled to have his own friends to stay if he wants to. This is my house, so I have the final say, I'd like to think. You shouldn't come down on him so hard. When we were kids, we were both fascinated by ghost stories, so I think it's perfectly natural for teenagers to be interested in cemeteries and stuff like that. We weren't much different at that age, I'd like to remind you, Sammy. I was never interested in ghosts, said my mother defensively. I wouldn't be seen dead exploring a cemetery at the dead of night. Are you kidding me? It's outrageous. That's what it is. That's a maybe, chuckled my aunt. But I'll tell you one thing for nothing, sis. You were always asking Pops to tell us ghost stories, so go on. Let Ivan stay here. What harm can it do? Teenagers will be teenagers. Very well, said my mother. But watch yourself around Ivan, son. That's all I'm saying. She pointed an accusing finger at me, as if she'd caught me with my hand in the cookie jar. But I didn't care one jot. At least Ivan was coming to stay, and that was all that mattered. When Ivan arrived at Aunt Heidi's house, I was thrilled to see him again. It had been so long. Ivan was enchanted by the unassuming town in which we lived, with its rural vibe and scenic views. I think he was extremely glad, if the truth be told, to get away from Spokane. We were as close as brothers, always had been, since we were teeny boppers, and he was the only person that knew all about my father's untimely death, and how I'd accidentally killed him. When I told him what had happened that dreadful night, when everything in my life went into a wild spin like a Ferris wheel at a playground that falls apart on its own accord, he took it remarkably well, and remained true, faithful, and loyal to me as a friend. Your mum's to blame, bro. If it hadn't been for that power failure, then you would have seen that the man shaking your mother was actually your dad. It was so dark in your house that night. You couldn't see a thing, and you panicked, especially when you heard that noise, because you thought that thug in our neighbourhood had broken in and was holding your mother to ransom. Furthermore, your mum cheated on your dad with this old lover of hers. It's disgusting, if you ask me. It's no wonder your poor father cried out like a strangled animal in distress. You mark my words, if your mother paid her bills on time and had not cheated on your dad in the way she did, none of this would have happened. She's entirely to blame for your father's demise. You were the innocent party in all this, as was your sister and your father. I hope your mother's proud of herself for what she's done to your family." I knew that Ivan had a point, but I still blamed myself for my dad's untimely passing. If my mother knew I'd confided in Ivan on the matter, about this strictly confidential and private family matter, she would have probably done her nut. But what she failed to appreciate was that Ivan was family to me. I knew I could trust Ivan with my life, and he would never betray me. My Aunt Heidi was warmly welcoming to Ivan when he arrived at her rather humdrum, mediocre and very brand-looking house. You know, the sort of very unexceptional beige-looking affair that looks more like one of those old gas stations from the early 70s that you would see in the movies, that you find situated somewhere in the sticks. Without wishing to be unkind, Aunt Heidi's house looked a little frayed and tired, worn at the edges, as if it had had a very hard life. My Aunt Heidi made no secret of the fact that she was not remotely domesticated. She had zero style, so the house she lived in was a cookie-cutter version of many houses in these parts, that lacked charm, charisma, personality, and individuality, as if someone who'd built a collection of these houses at the time had done so with only practicality in mind, and had not considered that it might be rather nice to have a house that was pleasing on the eye. My Aunt Heidi never believed houses should be anything but purposely functional, but I hasten to say what her house lacked for in beauty, the outside world more than compensated by splashing the countryside in seasonally rich colours, in both spring, summer, and autumn, while winters were always reasonably dramatic. You only had to glance outside the windows at the prepossessing views to forget about the drab, mismatched, less than glamorous furnishings in the house that Aunt Heidi looked like she'd picked up from garage sales and thrift stores. Aunt Heidi was a very tactful person, was politely reserved at all times. She tended to keep her thoughts to herself. She was stiff upper lip and very ordered in everything she did. I was not surprised she had worked for the sheriff's office at one point. She and my mother were the antithesis of each other in every way, but their startling big differences seemed to be complementary to their relationship. When my father died, Aunt Heidi handled everything so efficiently, as if handling a dead body was pretty routine for her. But I suppose in a manner of speaking it was. She admitted she'd seen a few dead bodies in her time, so it didn't creep her out the way it did us. "Your father's gone now," she said so matter-of-factly. "This is just his meat suit. It's not him anymore." Then she said, "Well, let's get on with this, shall we? We have a body to bury. No point in dawdling about this, is there? And quit being emotional. The milk has already been spilt, so it's far too late for any regrets." Aunt Heidi surprised me by throwing her arms around Ivan and expressing her incredible pleasure to meet him. I think she believed my mother's attitude towards Ivan was completely unreasonable, even if he did dabble in the occult. Out of the two sisters, Aunt Heidi had always been the sensible one, whereas my mother allowed her emotions to govern her thoughts at most times. "It's good to see you, Ivan," she told him. "Austin has told me all about you." "Oh, good, I hope," said Ivan cheekily, giving my aunt a wink. He gave my mother a charmed smile and said, "How are you doing, Mrs. Harris?" My mother just glared at him, like a cat who takes a distinct dislike to a member of the family and would seriously like to scratch their eyes out. "Hello, Ivan," she said coldly. "It's been a while, has it not?" "It sure has, Mrs. Harris. Mum sends you all her love, by the way. And oh, thanks for letting me stay. To be honest, I think she's glad to get rid of me for a couple of days." "I bet she is," said my mother. Before my mother could continue with any more sarcasm, it was Aunt Heidi who interjected as quickly as she could. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Ivan. We're delighted to have you stay with us for the weekend. I do know that Austin has missed you awfully, and it's going to be good for him having you around. There are lots of exciting things to do around here in terms of hiking and exploring, but I'm sure Austin has told you all about it. I know we're a little out in the sticks here, Ivan, but for the adventure seeker like yourself, you're going to have a lot of fun with us this weekend." "I'm excited to be here, and I'm eager to go fishing." "Good, I'm glad to hear that. You'll find all the tackle that you need in the shed." My mother remained aloof towards my visitor, and Ivan picked up on her unwelcoming manner, which was rather unfortunate. "What's wrong with your mum?" he asked me when we were alone in my bedroom. "She's been standoffish towards me since I arrived. I could swear she's glaring at me all the time. Have I done something to irk her or something?" "I think she's freaking out. She thinks you're a bad influence on me because of your interest in the occult," I said. Ivan rolled his eyes in the back of his head in exasperation. "Ha! I knew it. I might have guessed. My mother's been blabbing as usual to your mother, putting the knife in as she always does. Do you know she actually dragged me to Pastor Lee, kicking and screaming? Well, not really, but you know what I mean. Let's just say I wasn't remotely happy to see the pastor. Oh, Pastor Lee, he went on and on. He gave me a lecture about the dangers of talking to the dead. And he went on and on about my using a Ouija board and how upset I'd made my mother. I've never seen my mother so angry before. She burnt up my Ouija board, can you believe that? She also bolted the windows in my bedroom shut. Even Dad said she'd gone over the top. So I wasn't able to slip out during the night to go to the cemetery. But then I guess that's old news to you, because you know about all that, because my mother's been gassing to your mother, I suspect, like they always do." "I do know everything," I laughed. "I never heard the end of it from my mother, who kept telling me not to be friends with you because you're a bad influence on me. That's never going to stop me being friends with you, and you know that." "Well, that explains why she's been so bitter towards me," said Ivan. "I'm a regular teenager just like you, and if she can't see that, she's as blind as a bat. Well, guess what? I bought another Ouija board along with me today," said Ivan excitedly, his eyes growing round with enthusiasm. "I buried it beneath some of my sweaters in my weekend travel bag, so my mother couldn't see it, because she's always snooping. She really believes I've given up all that stuff and that I listened to Pastor Lee. If my mother found this Ouija board, she'd absolutely lose it. But what she doesn't know won't hurt her. She always overreacts to everything I do. She thinks I'm going to invite a demon into our house if I play with a Ouija board. But I'm not stupid. I know what I'm doing." I was rather bemused to discover that Ivan had bought a Ouija board with him on this trip. "Why would you do that? You know what my mother feels about those things. She reacts like your mum does. If she knew, she'd absolutely flip." "That's because your mother is rigidly stiff just like mine is. But your Aunt Heidi's super cool." Ivan chuckled. "I got the Ouija board for you, bro, as a gift, if you must know. I figured you'd find it rather useful. Like a tool, you know, to bring you some closure over your dad's untimely passing. We can connect with your father on it. You have an opportunity to tell him how sorry you are for what happened that night. You can make your peace with him that way. Remember you told me you wished you could do that. Now is your opportunity." "But doesn't he know that already?" I asked. "Surely the dead know everything. He'd know I didn't hurt him on purpose," I said, feeling the back of my throat suddenly becoming rather dry, and my eyes moistening with tears of great regret. "I'm not sure the dead do know these things. I don't think they know everything," said Ivan, looking reflective. "I think that's a myth, you know, a common misunderstanding. Do you know, I heard from a reliable source that some dead people don't even know they're dead, and that they're restless spirits wandering around very confused. They are like this often if they've died very suddenly and unexpectedly, like in a car accident, or like your dad did when you beat him across the head. Imagine if your dad's spirit is wandering around that wood grove where he's been buried. He might be wondering what the hell he's doing there, or what actually happened to him. Maybe he doesn't even know he's dead. Your dad died so suddenly. Remember that? I suppose he did, I agreed. I mean, after I hit him with that bat, he was a goner. It was an immediate death. Well, there you go then. He wasn't prepared to die, was he? I'm sure you want your dad to be at peace and to cross over to the other side without feeling that he's got unfinished business on this side. He could be worrying, couldn't he, about you and your sister? And that could be a stumbling block for him, holding him back from crossing over, don't you think? I mean, imagine if you're a father and you're taken away prematurely from your kids. Wouldn't you want to hang around to protect your family? I know I would. You think he's wandering around the grove, confused? I asked, finding the idea extremely unsettling. If this was true, I was responsible, not only for my dad's early demise, but his distress after death. And this was a very unsettling thought indeed. I knew Ivan knew all about the occult. He seemed to know much about the long since deceased. So if he intrinsically believed my dad had become a restless spirit, why should I doubt him on that? For I knew nothing at all about the spirit world. Ivan shrugged his shoulders rather nonchalantly. Well, you don't know, do you? That's the point. If we contact your father on the Ouija board, you can make your peace with him. You can tell him that you will look after your sister and your mother for him. You can give him that reassurance that he needs. So he doesn't have to stay around. He's free to cross over to the other side. You're giving him a gift. You can tell him you'll be the man of the house from now on. I think it'll bring your father the closure and the relief he needs. You've suffered a lot since your father died. You've been blaming yourself for what happened, when none of this was your fault. But I think if you speak to your father, you will realize that even though he's gone, he's still very much around, and that he doesn't blame you for any of this. You think this is a good idea? You think we should do this? Contact my father through the Ouija board? Will he even respond to us? Of course he will. And it's a great idea. You want answers, don't you? I'm sure this is going to give you some peace. But are you sure we can contact him on the spirit board? But of course we can. We can slip out of the house and sneak into the wood grove together at night to find the spot where he was buried, because then we'll be in close contact to him. I'm sure we'll get a response from him. If that doesn't work, well, you could book a session with a renowned psychic. There is an excellent psychic in Spokane, but she charges big bucks for her sessions. It's best to bypass the middleman, don't you think? I nodded. But why can't we do this during the day? I asked. I'm not comfortable about going to the woods at night. It could be rather creepy. You have no idea how menacing the woods can look during the witching hours. Aunt Heidi has told us to stay away from the woods at night. The only time I've been there was when we buried Dad. And yes, it was a magical night, but it was still creepy. She claims to have heard strange noises coming from those woods. But we have to go at night, bro, don't you see that? There's too much distraction during the day. When I went into the graveyard at night with the spirit board on my own, without anybody else around, you can't believe the excellent responses I got from the deceased, from those very graves. But during the day, there's far too much going on. Besides, if your mum knew what we were doing, she'd absolutely lose it like my mother. Those two are two birds of a feather. If we sneak out into the grove at night, they won't know a single thing about this, will they? Ivan pulled a face. I know everything looks formidable at night, but I brought along torches for us to see our way clearly. And you never know, it might even be an adventure. I think we'll actually have fun. It'll be exciting. I was reluctant about going to the Woodgrove at night with a Ouija board. I'm afraid to say I've never been as adventurous, as Ivan is. In truth, the idea I found rather discomposing, especially as people like my mother believed that playing with a Ouija board could invite demonic spirits into our lives. But Ivan kept reassuring me that this would never happen. He must know what he was talking about, I thought. He said if we surrounded ourselves with love and light, well, we would be absolutely fine. And his brazen confidence calmed the storms of my disease. The long and the short of it was that Ivan was right. I desperately needed closure after my father's passing, and if doing this meant I could get my message across to him, then I was very keen to do this. There are no words I can use to describe how much I dreadfully missed my late father. And when you're desperate enough to get in contact with someone that has left their physical body, you'll be surprised by what you are willing to do. It was at about 1:10 in the morning that Ivan began to jolt me wide awake. I woke up with a start, realizing why it was I had been rudely woken out of my sleep. I really didn't want to get up at this time, but Ivan's eager, resolutely determined face inspired me to arise from my slumber, even if it was rather reluctantly.
"Are you ready, Austin?" he whispered urgently. "You need to be exceptionally quiet. We don't want to wake anyone up in your household, especially not your mother, given she suffers from insomnia. So we have to be twice as careful."
I groaned, wiping my hand across my face, where beads of perspiration appeared to have broken out, because I was nervous about this whole ordeal.
"I'm not sure I can do this, Ivan. I'm really scared. I'm scared of using the spirit board. I'm scared of going into the woods at this hour. Can't we just not do it? I just don't think I can do it." "Bro, I promise you that everything's going to be fine. I've done this lots of times before, and I'm okay, aren't I? You'll be thanking me after tonight. This little experiment is going to bring you so much peace, and you want that, don't you?" "I suppose I do, but I'm scared if we conjure up a demon. What if we do that?" "We're not going to conjure up a demon. That's crazy. Your mum's been filling your head with all the stuff my mother's been saying. I've done this lots and lots of times, and nothing's happened to me, and I'm fine. Ouija boards get a bad rap, that's all. If you know how to use them, you won't invite evil into your life. It's that simple. You just won't. You need to know what you're doing, that's all. And I know what I'm doing. You've got nothing to worry about. We've got to do this. I know you're going to be thankful that we did."
Ivan's words were rather reassuring. We quickly put our tracksuits and sneakers on, and then quietly tiptoed down the hallway, making our way out of the kitchen. I was absolutely petrified my mother would be up and about, but I do know that she'd been taking some sleeping medication of late to help with her raging insomnia, and it appeared to be working, although her doctor warned her that she could become addicted to it. It was after my dad's death my mother knew she needed a helping hand in that regard, as her sleeping patterns had become even more splintered. I found Aunt Heidi's kitchen key. It was in the little chef-shaped cookie jar on the counter, which seemed to stare at us menacingly in the half-light, which did little to calm my rather flustered nerves. In truth, Aunt Heidi hardly ever kept the kitchen door locked. That was until we moved in, of course, when my mother was increasingly more nervous about leaving any door slightly open. So I opened the door very slowly, allowing a cool breeze to enter the room. It was early spring, so it was sometimes quite cool in the mornings and evenings. The door swung open with an ominous, unwelcome creak that was so loud I was worried it would wake my mother up. But there was no sound coming from inside the house, so it seemed like the coast was clear. It was colder outside than I imagined it would be. Ivan handed me a torch and took one for himself, and we headed very steadily down my aunt's rather hilly backyard towards the woods. I was glad to see that a generous, almost full moon splashed her mystical illumination across the countryside, so that things did not seem quite so daunting as I'd expected them to be. But my relief, I'm afraid to say, was rather short-lived. The wailing noises of the wind did nothing to silence the blistered anxiety of my trepidation that seemed to have nestled in my throat like a bird's nest stuck down a chimney. I could feel the cold air penetrate my tracksuit, which was rather unfortunate, rather like water in a lake that soaks through your clothing, causing you to shiver uncontrollably. My shivering was probably more to do with nerves than with cold. I was beginning to regret that I was not more warmly attired. Before long we were ambling down the windy rocky path through the trees, with me leading the way to my father's resting place. It felt as if the woods were closing in on us, rather like a conniving pack of wolves that were circling their prey. There was something inauspiciously bodeful about the woods that night, but I persuaded myself that it was all in my head. I mean, we could hear the tuneful chorus of crickets and frogs. That had to be a good thing, surely. It was significantly darker, I'm afraid to say, when we entered the heart of the woods, which was dappled with the pessimistic stench of a bone-chilling disquiet, one that I cannot describe to you. Somehow it felt all wrong coming here in the middle of the night like this, and a little voice inside me told me to go back home, but I couldn't listen to it. I glanced briefly at Ivan for some kind of reassurance. He was carrying the duffel bag over his shoulders that contained the Ouija board. I noticed he didn't appear to be the slightest bit dismayed by the unsettling, gloomy ambience in the woods. Indeed, he looked as if he was going for a leisurely stroll, and was rather enjoying himself. How could he be so calm and composed, I wondered? If he was not being freaked out, then what on earth was wrong with me? I was 17 years old, for goodness sake. I wasn't a baby, nor was I a scaredy cat, so I needed to grow a pair. And stop being such a douchebag. I didn't want Ivan to see the wavering doubt that was clinging to me with every single step we took deeper and deeper into the woods. I had this discommoding feeling that we were not alone, and that something or someone was watching us. I kept glancing very nervously behind my shoulders, as I was sure something was there. I could feel something. I would thrust my torchlight over the tangled foliage and shrubbery to see if I could see any sign of movement, but I wasn't rewarded with anything. All I could hear was the whisper of the wind, but that seemed to be conspiring against us, and it was as if the trees themselves knew all too well what we intended to do, almost as if our deepest secrets had all been unveiled. I didn't feel remotely welcome in this place. It felt sinister. At one point I nearly screamed when 2 raccoons went charging past us in a frantic, desperate rush. They barely even seemed to notice us. In fact, I wonder if they did at all. They seemed to be affrighted by something. But what? I could not imagine. Should we be concerned, I wondered? At one point in the wood grove we heard this loud, wailing sound, which had nothing to do with the wind at all. This was something infinitely worse. It made me jump out of my skin. The sound returned again and again. There were more wails that echoed through the woods. The sound turned my blood icy cold. "What the hell is that, Ivan?" I said, feeling a charge of electricity pulsate through me, so every hair on the back of my body was now standing on end. I was terrified. I looked at my friend with affrighted eyes. "Of course I heard it," said Ivan, chuckling. "Don't you know woods are notorious for making weird noises? You hear about it all the time. It's probably just a wild animal crying out. I know it sounds like a woman being killed, but I promise you it's not. When I used to slip out to the cemetery at night, you wouldn't believe the noises I would hear. They were very scary, but you can't let them get to you. You've got to overcome your imagination, because that can steal your courage." "I don't know. I just feel uncomfortable being in the woods. Something doesn't feel right. I feel scared. I feel as if something is watching us." "That's because your imagination is in overdrive. I warned you about that. You've got to focus on just walking to the gravesite. Then you'll be all right. Don't let your imagination get the better of you." I wanted to believe Ivan was right, but something crawling inside me was making me feel certain that we were not alone.
and that something or someone was watching us. I was sure of it. Worse still, the crickets and frogs had suddenly become mute, and that was not a good sign. Everything had become so much quieter. It was as if we had become the actors on the stage, and the woodgrove had turned its attention directly on us, as if it had become our audience. We were the actors about to play our parts. I was absolutely sure I could occasionally hear, beyond the rustle of the wind, wood knocks, screams, and the breaking of twigs and branches, but Ivan appeared to be tuning it all out, as if it was water off a duck's back for him. His oblivious indifference to the strange noises around us made me feel very self-conscious and rather foolish. I was overreacting to the sounds in the woods, and Ivan was absolutely right. Before long we reached the little clearing between the trees, where my father was buried. It was reassuring being close to his gravesite, almost as if he was watching over us, and I felt immeasurable relief. I walked over to the tree and pointed to a spot where a single white stone was strategically placed, marking my father's grave. "He's over there, where the white stone is. That's his grave." A rush of emotions overwhelmed me as I stooped down lovingly to touch the stone. "Hi, Dad," I whispered. "I really miss you." "Let's get started, shall we?" said Ivan, as we sat down on the ground with torches at our side, and with the opening between the trees very generous, so that moonlight spilled down upon us, rather like the sunshine on a warm day. And for a brief moment, I can honestly say this, all my worries were washed away by the ethereal magic of this quintessential moment. In a trice we got down to business, and Ivan laid out the Ouija board on the ground. We began to play with the board, with our hands both on the planchette, which began to move on its own accord. And this strange cryptic phenomenon really rather rattled me. "Why are you moving the planchette, Ivan?" I complained. "I'm not moving it. It's moving on its own. It's perfectly natural. That's what you expect to happen." "Is anyone here?" asked Ivan. And the planchette moved to yes. It was this response that had me jiggling nervously, doubting at once that what we were doing was a good idea after all. But it was too late to express my misgivings now. "Ask a question," Ivan encouraged me. "Dad, is that you?" I cried out. The planchette moved to yes. I was now very excited. I had connected with my dad. My heart began to race in my chest. This was my opportunity of making contact with my father. Was he really here with us now? "Dad, are you at peace?" I asked. The planchette moved to yes. What a relief that was to hear. Before we could get any further with our questioning, we heard a loud screeching roar that was so blearingly ear-piercing. I felt as if this inharmonious sound was shaking every single cell in my body. I was so petrified that my fingers fell off the planchette. My body began to tremble like a blancmange jelly. And I became pretty useless, I have to say. "Something's there, Ivan. I know something's there. I can feel it. Oh my God, I'm sure something is there. We need to get out of this woods now. We need to stop this now. We need to go." Ivan had grown as white as a sheet. His mouth dropped open. His eyes grew wide. He appeared to be looking at something, and the fear in his eyes was so contagious, like a deadly disease. His convoluted gaze affirmed to me my very worst fears. Something was definitely there. I hadn't been wrong about that. I glanced behind me, trying to focus on my gaze on what it was that Ivan appeared to have seen. But as I did so, a large, dark silhouette, with an untamed wild roar, came racing through the trees, screaming with such indignation that I just froze to the spot. My body became like an idle, incompetent doormat that could be easily trodden upon, or like a solid, freckless statue that can't move a single inch. I was totally unresponsive to the situation of which I found myself embodied. I knew I needed to escape, but I was almost resigned to my impending fate, as if I knew this was it for me, and for my good friend Ivan. I was so enfeebled and impaired by the incapacitating effects of a dizzying fear that I froze to the spot, and then there he was, standing before me, only feet away from us. He was beating his ponderous chest with his fists, glaring at us with furiously enraged red eyes, and with the moonlight casting its light on the creature's gargantuan lordly form, I realized that I was staring at a Bigfoot. There are no words to describe this daunting creature, for never in my entire life have I ever encountered something so threatening. The Bigfoot stood up on two formidable tree-trunk-sized legs that looked so stocky and burly, I'm certain if he wanted to, he could kick a vehicle right over. His hair was as black as the night. The shape of his body was made out of the fabric of your darkest, most intimidating, inhospitable nightmares. For a moment I even thought we had conjured up a demon from the Ouija board that was pretending to be my father, because the Bigfoot was like a giant man, covered in hair. I cannot describe the rage that came off this creature. I was now certain we were going to die. This Bigfoot was going to kill us. There was no doubt about this in my mind, that this would be our plight. Even if me and Ivan managed to run away from the creature as fast as we possibly could, I was certain we were doomed. Ivan grabbed me by the hand. He pulled me to my feet. "Run!" he bellowed. "Run!" Me and Ivan began to run. I was like an old battered car parked in the driveway, stalling precariously, that suddenly just jerked into life by magic. My legs seemed to miraculously find a life of their own. I've never been able to replicate how fast I ran through the woods that night. I managed to grab my torch, and without it I'm not sure how I would have found my way through the impenetrable bleak darkness the trees had injected into the woods, with their boughs that cruelly blocked out all the light. The Bigfoot was hurriedly gaining ground on us. I could hear his heavy breathing, and his loud screams, and the way his feet pounded and vibrated across the forest floor. He was getting far too close for comfort. I thought we were about to die. I was certain of it. Once we left the wood grove, embraced by the light of the full moon, the Bigfoot remained on the edge of the woods, watching us. He had stopped chasing us. I don't think Ivan and I slowed down a single second. We ran until we safely made our way into the house. I do not know how we didn't wake up our entire household, for once we entered my bedroom, we both broke down into floods of tears, feeling certain we had escaped death by a hair's breadth. I leaned out of the bedroom window and glanced towards the wood grove, and the Bigfoot was standing there, watching us. He stood there for many hours, until finally he went away. Looking back on that experience, Ivan and I chose not to share it with anyone. I was naturally reluctant to show my sister where my father was buried. Over the years I'd warned her never to go into the woods, persuading her that it could be dangerous, and I'm glad she never did, and heeded to my warnings. Now she wanted to see where my father was buried. I could not deprive her of that privilege, and to lay down flowers on his resting place. I did wonder what if the Bigfoot that came close to killing me and Ivan was still around, but I persuaded myself that an encounter with the creature a second time around would be exceedingly unlikely. I mean, people all over the world were looking for the quintessential opportunity to encounter the elusive beast, and were never successful in their endeavours, so the chances of stumbling on the creature again were pretty close to remote. But nevertheless I would go into the woods armed to ensure our safety. I do remember a month after my inauspicious encounter with the Bigfoot, my Aunt Heidi had gone into the grove to visit the grave, and announced that she had found the Ouija board that Ivan and I had used to contact my father with. It had been torn to shreds, but she told me she wouldn't tell my mother about it. She picked up the pieces and discarded them in the dumpster. I guess she knew what me and Ivan had been up to. She gave me a wink and told me that my secret was safe with her. I will say this, though, love. Your mother's right. Don't go messing around with stuff you don't understand. It's not a wise thing to do. I've heard some rather unsettling stories about Ouija boards in my time. Don't worry, Aunt Heidi. I won't do it again.
I don't want anything to do with that kind of stuff. Good, I'm glad to hear you say that. I hasten to say my friend Ivan had lost all interest in all things supernatural. Our encounter with the Bigfoot had stolen his interest in the paranormal, and now he would never dream of attempting to talk to the dead. So I guess some good had come out of a rather bad, tenuous situation. I had no idea who had torn up the Ouija board to shreds, but I could only assume it was the work of a very angry, irate Bigfoot. It was after my sister begged me to show her my father's grave in the woods that finally I agreed to take her to where he'd been laid to rest, as the last thing I wanted was for my sister to be wandering around the grove on her own, trying to locate the burial spot for herself. At least if I accompanied her, she would be safe and I would be armed. It was on a pretty Saturday morning in spring that we ventured into the grove. The last time I'd been in the woods had been with Ivan all those years ago. It had also been spring. But since my encounter with an aggressive Bigfoot, I had stayed the hell away and encouraged the family to do very much the same, although I had never admitted to why this was the case. I do remember my sister was carrying a big bouquet of flowers, and as we sashayed down the path through the woods, I was beginning to wonder why I'd stayed away for so very long. Everything was benevolently benign. The energy of the woods was warmly welcoming. When we found my father's grave, my sister laid down her bouquet of flowers for him. For a while we both said some kind words to my father, and then we sensed something was watching us. We both looked up, and there, standing in the trees, was the male Bigfoot, watching us. My sister observed him as well. It was the same Bigfoot that had chased me and Ivan away from the grave all those years ago. He was older, but unquestionably the same creature. I know he recognized me, as I recognized him, for he held my gaze. It was in that moment, as I looked into the Bigfoot's eyes, I saw only a tender kindness and compassion in them. And yet this very same creature had aggressively chased me and Ivan away from the woodgrove that night, when we had been playing with a Ouija board. It was then that I wondered if it was our actions that night that had provoked the Bigfoot to anger, because as he watched us through the trees, for a second he seemed curiously interested in us, but not remotely aggressive. He then nodded his head at me in a greeting, and then he glided away, and I had no time to even be afraid. My sister was thrilled that we had encountered the creature, and she said to me, "They say Bigfoots are dangerous and aggressive. The creature is a big teddy bear." I remember thinking, if only you knew. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.